A 17-year-old girl slides her phone across a greasy diner table toward a stranger, a scarred, hollow-eyed biker she has never spoken to. On that screen is a website, her face, her body, a price tag. She's being sold by the man sitting 20 feet away, the man the state of Pennsylvania appointed to protect her. What happens next will send 200 motorcycles screaming into the winter darkness with their headlights off, toward a farmhouse where a wolf waits with no idea what's coming. This is the story of Avery Hale, and how a broken man and a brotherhood of ghosts became the only family she ever had. Stay with me until the very end. This one's gonna wreck you. Drop a like right now, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The diner had no name worth remembering. A flat-roofed concrete box squatting on the shoulder of Route 9, somewhere between the dead mill towns of Harwick and Brenton, Pennsylvania, where the Appalachian foothills gave way to nothing but frozen cornfields and silence. The neon sign above the door buzzed and flickered. Half the letters had burned out years ago, so it just read "Eat" in a sickly orange glow that bled into the winter haze like a wound that wouldn't close. Ridge Callahan sat in the last booth, the one closest to the kitchen, where the heat from the fryers kept the vinyl seat warm enough that his lower back didn't seize up. 48 years old, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. His knuckles were a topographic map of bad decisions, scar tissue layered over scar tissue, one thumb permanently crooked from a fracture that never got set right. His leather jacket creaked when he shifted, and the smell of it, old hide, road grease, cold air trapped in the fibers, was the only thing that still felt like home. He wasn't waiting for anyone. That was the point. Tuesdays at the Route 9 diner were his ritual of erasure. No phone calls, no club business, no voices asking him for things he couldn't give, just the hiss of the coffee machine, the clatter of dishes in the back, and the low moan of wind pushing against the plate glass windows like something trying to get in. Outside, his Harley sat alone in the gravel lot, frost already forming on the chrome. A 2003 Road King with a cracked fairing and more miles on it than most commercial trucks. The engine had cooled, but Ridge could still feel the vibration in his forearms, his wrists, the base of his skull. Phantom rumble. The bike talked to him even when it was silent. Sometimes it was the only conversation he could tolerate. The bell above the door rang. Ridge didn't look up. People came and went, truckers, shift workers from the poultry plant down the highway, occasionally a state trooper grabbing a to-go cup before disappearing back into the gray. None of them mattered, none of them registered. But something in the air shifted. He felt it before he saw it, a disturbance in the ordinary rhythm of the room. The waitress behind the counter stopped wiping down the formica. The cook's radio, which had been playing some country station at a mumble, seemed to get quieter, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Ridge lifted his eyes. A man walked in first, mid-50s, clean shave, pressed khakis, a quilted navy vest over a button-down shirt. The kind of man who looked like he sold insurance or sat on a school board. His smile was wide and practiced, and it went absolutely nowhere near his eyes. Those eyes were scanning the room with the quick, calibrated sweep of someone who always needed to know where the exits were. Not because he was afraid, because he was calculating. Behind him, a girl. 17, maybe. Hard to tell because everything about her was diminished. Shoulders hunched forward, chin tucked, arms crossed tight over her midsection like she was trying to fold herself into something small enough to disappear. Pale skin. Dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore a thin jacket that was wrong for the weather, and her sneakers were wet from the slush outside. No gloves. Her fingers were red and raw. She moved like a dog that had been kicked so many times it flinched at shadows. Ridge watched her sit down across from the man in a booth near the window. She didn't pick up a menu, didn't look around, didn't do any of the things a teenager in a diner would normally do. She just sat there, perfectly still, staring at the salt shaker like it contained the last secret in the universe. The man ordered for both of them. Didn't ask her what she wanted. The waitress, Pam, 63, smoker's voice, bifocals on a beaded chain, glanced at the girl and then back at the man and wrote down the order without comment. Ridge looked away. Told himself it was none of his business, drank his cold coffee, listened to the wind. But his hands were shaking, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. He knew that posture, knew that silence, knew the way a person's body learned to shrink itself when the world had taught it that taking up space meant getting hurt. He knew it because he'd lived inside that posture for the first 16 years of his life, in a house in Scranton where his father's belt had a name and his mother's solution was to turn the television up louder. He knew it because he'd spent 30 years trying to unlearn it, and some nights, alone in his apartment above the garage on Decatur Street, he still woke up curled into that same fetal geometry, arms crossed, chin down, making himself small. The girl hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The food came, a burger for the man, a bowl of soup for her, and she picked up the spoon with the mechanical precision of someone performing a task she'd been ordered to complete. No hunger in it, no pleasure, just compliance. The man ate with one hand and scrolled through his phone with the other. Occasionally he'd say something to her without looking up, and she would nod. Quick, tight nods. The kind that meant yes, sir, and please don't, and I'll be good. Ridge's coffee mug cracked in his grip. Not metaphorically. The ceramic handle actually fractured, a hairline split that sent lukewarm coffee running across the table and into his lap. He swore under his breath, grabbed a napkin, and that was when the girl looked at him. Across 30 feet of linoleum in cheap fluorescent light and the accumulated misery of a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of nowhere, their eyes met. Hers were gray, the color of river stones, and they were not empty. That was the thing that hit Ridge like a fist to the sternum. They were full, overfull, crammed with something that had no exit, no valve, no language, terror and exhaustion and a desperate animal intelligence that was constantly measuring distances, calculating threats, mapping escape routes that didn't exist. She looked at him the way a person looks at a lifeboat from the deck of a sinking ship. Then the man said something sharp. Ridge couldn't hear the words, just the tone, that particular frequency of controlled menace that sounds polite to anyone not paying attention. And the girl dropped her gaze back to her soup. Ridge sat there with coffee soaking through his jeans and a cracked mug in his hand, and 30 years of buried wreckage rising in his chest like floodwater. He should leave. He should pay his check and walk out and ride his Harley back to Brenton and drink a beer in his apartment and forget the gray-eyed girl in the thin jacket, because the world was full of gray-eyed girls in thin jackets, and he couldn't save any of them. Couldn't even save himself most days. He should leave. He didn't leave. The man got up to use the restroom, took his phone but left the girl alone in the booth. It happened fast, the kind of calculated absence that was really a test. Leave the prisoner unguarded for 60 seconds and see if she tries anything. See if she's still obedient when you come back. The girl's hand moved, quick and sure, nothing hesitant about it. She reached into her own jacket pocket, pulled out a phone, cheap, prepaid, the kind you buy at a gas station, and slid out of the booth in one fluid motion, 3 steps across the aisle. She set the phone on Ridge's table and slid it toward him with trembling fingers. Please. One word, barely a whisper. Her voice cracked on it like thin ice under a boot. Then she was gone. Back in her booth, hands in her lap, eyes on the soup. As if she'd never moved at all. Ridge looked down at the phone. The screen was already open to a browser page, a website. The design was crude, dark background, garish font, the aesthetic of something built quickly by someone who didn't care about polish because the product sold itself. There were photographs. 4 of them. Different angles, different lighting, all of the same girl. The girl sitting 20 feet away. Beneath the photographs were specifications. Height, weight, age, hair color, eye color, and then a paragraph of text that Ridge read twice because his brain rejected it the first time, tried to reclassify it as something other than what it was. It was a listing, a sales page. The language was clinical and obscene at once, describing the girl as if she were livestock, detailing availability, preferences, pricing structures, a contact form at the bottom, a chat function, a goddamn rating system. The name at the top of the listing was Avery Hale. The host of the listing, buried in the page source that Ridge wouldn't have known how to find, but that was visible in a small footer tag at the bottom, was a name, Grant Holloway. Ridge looked up. The man in the quilted vest was walking back from the restroom, drying his hands on his khakis. Grant Holloway, foster guardian, school board volunteer, the man the state of Pennsylvania had entrusted with a child's life. Something old and dark and irreversible shifted inside Ridge Callahan's chest. Not anger. Anger was too clean, too simple. This was the other thing. The thing beneath the anger, the thing that lived in the basement of every man who'd been broken as a boy and rebuilt himself with duct tape and engine grease and the stubborn refusal to die. It was recognition. The understanding that certain evils don't exist in the abstract. They sit across from you in diners and smile and order soup for the children they're selling. Ridge closed the phone, slid it into his jacket pocket, left a 20 on the table for Pam, and walked out into the cold. The wind hit him like a wall. 28 degrees, the sky the color of old concrete, and the first flakes of snow beginning to spiral down from nowhere. His boots crunched across the frozen gravel toward his Harley. His hands were steady now. The trembling was gone. Something had locked into place behind his sternum, a mechanism he hadn't engaged in years, something that ran on fury and purpose, and the absolute certainty that there was no version of the next 12 hours where he walked away from this. He threw a leg over the Road King, turned the key. The engine caught on the first try, that deep V-twin bark that shook the mirrors on the diner's front wall. He pulled out his own phone. Not the girl's. His. There was one number he hadn't dialed in 4 months. Not since the falling out. Not since the argument at the clubhouse that had ended with Ridge putting his fist through a drywall panel and Maddox telling him to walk it off or walk away. Ridge had chosen a way. Had spent the winter alone, nursing grievances and cheap bourbon, convincing himself he didn't need the club, didn't need the brotherhood, didn't need the only family that had ever held together. He dialed the number, 2 rings, 3. Yeah. The voice that answered was gravel and smoke and the particular exhaustion of a man who carried too many people's weight. Maddox Judge Mercer, president of the Iron Revenant Motorcycle Club. 54 years old, 2 combat tours, 1 ex-wife, 1 dead son. A face like a cliff face and hands that could rebuild a transmission or comfort a crying child with equal precision. It's Ridge. A pause. Long enough to feel the weight of 4 months of silence. I know who it is. I need you to listen to me. I'm listening. Ridge told him. All of it. The diner, the girl, the phone, the website. Grant Holloway. He kept his voice flat, clinical, because if he let the emotion in, he'd lose the thread, and Maddox needed the thread. Maddox always needed the facts before the feeling. When Ridge finished, the line was quiet for 8 seconds. He counted them. 8 seconds of nothing but the sound of wind and the low idle of his Harley, and somewhere in the distance, the lonely honk of a truck horn on the interstate. Then Maddox spoke. Sending the code. 3 words. That was all. The line went dead. Ridge sat on his bike in the parking lot of a nameless diner on Route 9, with snow accumulating on his shoulders and his breath coming out in white clouds. And he understood, with the calm clarity of a man who has stepped off a ledge, that the next few hours would either save a girl's life or destroy several others. Possibly both. 12 miles south, in the basement of an auto body shop on Industrial Boulevard in Brenton, Maddox Mercer set down his phone and picked up a different one. A burner. Preloaded with a single mass text capability that had been configured 3 years ago and tested twice. It was the club's emergency protocol. Not for bar fights or territory disputes or any of the petty territorial machinery that kept outlaw culture grinding along. This was the other thing. The sacred thing. The reason the Iron Revenants existed beneath the leather and the noise and the reputation. The message was simple. 6 characters. A location code. A timestamp. And a single word that every patched member, every prospect, every retired rider who'd ever worn the club's insignia understood as an absolute, non-negotiable summons. Guardian. The word spread through the network like voltage through a wire. In a garage in Millvale, a mechanic named Deacon wiped his hands on a rag and told his wife he'd be late. She didn't ask why. She'd been married to the club long enough to know what that word meant. In a high school parking lot in Connellsville, a shop teacher named Burns got the message between 6th and 7th period, walked into the principal's office, and said he had a family emergency. He was on his bike within 4 minutes. In a VA hospital waiting room in Pittsburgh, a one-armed former sergeant named Yates read the text, stood up, and walked out of his appointment without a word. The nurse called after him. He didn't turn around. In a cramped apartment above a bail bonds office in Charleroi, a woman named Sparrow, the club's intelligence officer, though no one used that phrase, was already on her third laptop before Maddox's follow-up call came through. Sparrow was 31, had a master's degree in computer forensics from Carnegie Mellon, and had chosen the iron revenants over a six-figure job at a defense contractor because she'd been 14 once, in a house not unlike the one Avery Hale was living in, and no one had come for her. She picked up the call on the first ring. "I need everything on Grant Holloway," Maddox said. "Brenton area, foster parent, and I need it before the snow gets bad." "How deep?" "Bottom." Sparrow cracked her knuckles. The sound was like small caliber rounds in the quiet apartment. She pulled up the prepaid phone's browser data that Ridge had forwarded, traced the website's registration through 3 layers of proxy servers, and within 40 minutes had a map of Holloway's digital life spread across her screens like an autopsy. What she found made her stomach turn, and Sparrow's stomach didn't turn easily. Grant Holloway, age 56. Retired county administrator. Licensed foster parent since 2018. 3 foster placements on record, all girls, all between the ages of 14 and 17. The first 2 had been returned to the system after behavioral issues. The paperwork was clean, bureaucratic, the kind of language that obscured everything. One of those girls had attempted suicide 6 months after leaving Holloway's care. The other had disappeared entirely. No forwarding address, no updated contact information, just a name that dead-ended in a database like a road that ran into a river. Avery Hale was his 3rd placement, assigned to him 11 months ago by the Westmoreland County Department of Children and Youth Services. Caseworker visits, 3. All scheduled in advance, all described as satisfactory in the follow-up reports. Sparrow pulled the web listing Ridge had found and traced its server to a network of similar pages, 14 in total, each featuring a different girl, each hosted through the same encrypted infrastructure. Holloway wasn't operating alone. He was a node in something larger, something organized, something that functioned with the quiet efficiency of a legitimate business because, to the people who ran it, that's exactly what it was. She called Maddox back. "It's not just him," she said. "It's a network. At least 14 listings active. I can trace the money through cryptocurrency wallets, but it'll take time." "How much time?" "More than we have tonight." Maddox was quiet. Outside his window, the snow was falling harder now, the streetlights turning it into swirling columns of white against the dark. "Then tonight we get the girl. Tomorrow, we get the rest." "Maddox?" Sparrow's voice dropped half an octave. "His property, rural address outside Scottdale. 40 acres, partially wooded, long driveway, no neighbors within a quarter mile. There's a secondary structure on the property. County records listed as a workshop, but the electrical draw doesn't match. It's pulling the kind of power you'd need for surveillance equipment, cameras, lighting rigs." The implication hung between them like smoke. "How many members confirmed?" Maddox asked. "As of 10 minutes ago? 146, still climbing. Tell them the staging point is the old Sunoco Depot on Highway 31. 2 hours." "Copy." Ridge was already riding east when Maddox called him back. The Road King's headlight carved a tunnel through the falling snow, and the cold had found every gap in Ridge's jacket, every seam, every zipper. His fingers were going numb inside his gloves. He didn't care. The numbness was in competition with something hotter, something that burned in the center of his chest like a coal that couldn't be extinguished. "Staging at the Sunoco Depot on 31, Maddox said. 2 hours. Sparrow's got the layout." "I'm not waiting 2 hours." "Yeah, you are." "Judge, listen to me." Maddox's voice had that particular timbre it got when argument was not an option. The voice that had held together a platoon in Fallujah when everything around them was falling apart. "You go in alone, you're a criminal. Breaking and entering. Assault. Whatever they want to charge you with, they will. And that girl goes right back into the system that put her there. Is that what you want?" Silence on the line, just the roar of the engine and the whistle of wind past the phone. 2 hours, Ridge said finally. The words tasted like broken glass. 2 hours. And Ridge? Yeah. Whatever you're feeling right now, use it. Don't let it use you. The line went dead. Ridge pulled off the highway at a gas station that was closed for the night. Parked under the dead fluorescent overhang. Killed the engine. Sat there in the dark with the snow collecting on his shoulders and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling motor and the absolute silence of a rural Pennsylvania night in January. He pulled out Avery's phone and looked at the screen again. Her face stared back at him from the listing. 17 years old, gray eyes. The photograph had been taken in what looked like a bedroom. Floral wallpaper, a wooden dresser in the background. She wasn't smiling, wasn't posing. She was standing in front of the camera with the same expression Ridge had seen in the diner. The look of a person who had been reduced to an object so thoroughly and for so long that she'd almost forgotten she was anything else. He closed the phone, put it away. Pressed his palms against his eye sockets until he saw colors. He thought about the first girl, the one who'd tried to kill herself. He thought about the second one, the one who'd vanished. He thought about the 14 other listings on that network, 14 other faces he hadn't seen yet, 14 other phones that nobody had slid across a diner table. He thought about the system, the caseworkers who scheduled their visits in advance so the monster had time to clean up, the courts that rubber-stamped foster placements because the dockets were full and the budgets were thin, the neighbors who saw nothing because nothing was easier than something, the entire architecture of civilized society that existed, in theory, to protect children, and that had failed Avery Hale so completely that her last option was a stranger in a diner with cracked knuckles and a motorcycle. The snow fell harder. Ridge Callahan sat in the dark and waited. 2 hours later, the abandoned Sunoco depot on Highway 31 looked like a scene from a war that hadn't started yet. The parking lot, cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through the fissures, a rusted gas pump island in the center, was filled with motorcycles, not parked in rows, clustered, organic, the way wolves gather before a hunt, finding their positions by instinct rather than instruction. The count was 193. They'd come from every direction, from the river towns and the hill towns and the old steel cities that had never recovered from the collapse. They'd come from warm kitchens and cold garages and hospital waiting rooms and night shifts they'd walked out of without explanation. Some of them hadn't worn their cuts in months. Some of them had ridden 3 hours through the storm. One man, 71 years old, a founding member who walked with a cane and rode a 1987 Softail, had driven his bike out of a storage unit where it had been sitting under a tarp for 2 years. They stood in the falling snow, breath clouding, engines ticking as they cooled. The only illumination came from a single sodium light on the depot's overhang, casting everything in a sickly amber wash that made the men look like ghosts. Which, in a way, they were. Ghosts of the people they'd been before the wars, before the losses, before the wreckage that had driven each of them to find family in the only place that would have them. Maddox stood on the back of a flatbed truck, the snow accumulating on his broad shoulders. He didn't have notes, didn't need them. His face was stone, his eyes moving across the crowd, making contact, acknowledging. Every man there knew him. Every man there had bled with him, or for him, or because of him. He spoke once. There's a kid, 17, being sold by the man the state told to keep her safe. We have the address. We have the evidence. Tonight we bring her out. Tomorrow the rest falls. He paused. Let the snow fill the silence. No weapons. No violence unless a life is at risk. We are the wall between that child and the darkness. Nothing more. Nothing less. He looked at Ridge, standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed and his jaw set so tight the muscles in his neck were cording. Ride quiet. Lights off for the last 2 miles. Surround the property. Nobody leaves that house. He stepped down from the truck. 193 engines turned over in the dark. The sound was not a roar. It was a growl. Low. Sustained. The kind of sound that vibrates in your chest and tells your body, on a primal level, that something massive is moving. They rolled out of the depot in a column that stretched a 1/4 mile, taillight to headlight to taillight, the formation tightening as they hit the back roads. Snow swirled in the draft of their passing. The trees on either side of the road were black and skeletal against the gray sky. and the only sound was the synchronized thunder of engines and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. 2 miles from the target, the headlights went dark. 193 motorcycles moving through the Pennsylvania countryside in total darkness, guided only by the faint luminance of snow-covered ground and the rider in front of them. No lights, no horns, no communication, just the deep mechanical pulse of engines held at low throttle and the crunch of frozen gravel beneath rubber. They surrounded the property from 3 directions. The driveway, the tree line to the north, the access road to the south that Sparrow had found on satellite imagery. Within 6 minutes, the perimeter was sealed. A ring of chrome and leather and scarred men standing in the snow, their breath rising like smoke signals to no one. The farmhouse sat in the center of the property like a clenched fist. 2 stories, faded clapboard siding, a porch light on, casting a yellow cone onto the frozen front steps. The secondary structure, the workshop, was visible behind the house, a squat cinder block building with a steel door and no windows. A faint blue glow leaked from beneath the door. Cameras. The electrical draw Sparrow had flagged. Whatever happened in that building, Holloway wanted to watch it, wanted to record it. Ridge stood at the base of the driveway. Maddox beside him. "Just us," Maddox said. "Just us." They walked, gravel under their boots, each step sharp as a gunshot in the silence. The porch steps creaked under their weight. Ridge could smell wood smoke from the chimney and something else, bleach, faint but unmistakable, the chemical signature of a man who cleaned up after himself. Maddox knocked. 30 seconds. 45. A light came on upstairs, footsteps, the sound of a deadbolt turning. The door opened. Grant Holloway stood in the doorway in a bathrobe and slippers, his thinning hair mussed, his eyes blinking against the porch light. For 1 second, he looked like exactly what his paperwork said he was. A retired county administrator, a pillar of the community, a man who opened his home to children in need. Then he saw Maddox's face. Then he looked past Maddox, past Ridge, into the darkness beyond the porch light, and he saw them. Shapes in the snow. Hundreds of them. Standing motionless between the trees along the fence line, beside the road, the faint gleam of chrome, the bulk of leather, breath rising, no sound, no movement, just presence, the absolute, immovable, suffocating presence of men who had come for one reason and would not leave until it was done. Holloway's face changed, the mask cracked, the pleasant expression drained away like water through a sieve, and what was left underneath was something pale and cornered and very, very afraid. "What?" he started. "Where is she?" Maddox's voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't need volume. The army behind him was his volume. Holloway's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted left, toward the back of the house, toward the workshop, and that involuntary glance told Ridge everything. Ridge moved, not fast, not violent, just forward, past Holloway, through the doorway, into the house. The interior smelled like carpet cleaner and microwaved meals, and the particular staleness of a home where no one was free. He moved through the living room, magazines on the coffee table, a television on mute, everything arranged with the sterile precision of a model home, and down a hallway to a closed door. He opened it. Avery was sitting on the floor in the corner of a small bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins. She was wearing the same thin jacket from the diner, as though she'd never taken it off, as though she was always ready to run even though she had nowhere to run to. When the door opened, she flinched so hard her head hit the wall behind her. Ridge stopped in the doorway, didn't step closer, didn't reach for her. He understood, in the marrow of his bones, that this girl had been reached for by too many hands that meant her harm, and that the fastest way to lose her trust was to move too quickly. He lowered himself to one knee, slowly, the way you approach a wounded animal. His leather jacket creaked, his knees popped. He was 48 and felt 70, and none of that mattered. "Avery?" She looked at him. Those gray eyes. Wet now. Red-rimmed, but recognizing. She'd seen him in the diner. She'd given him the phone. She'd launched the only flare she had into the darkness, and this man, this scarred stranger, had caught it. "You gave me something today," Ridge said. His voice was low and rough, and it cracked slightly on the last word, and he didn't try to fix it. I need you to know that I heard you. Okay? I heard you. Her chin trembled. A tear broke free and ran down her cheek, cutting a line through the exhaustion on her face. He'll... She started, stopped, swallowed. He'll make it go away. He always makes it go away. The caseworker believes him. Everyone believes him. Not tonight. You don't understand. He has people. He has Avery. Ridge held her gaze, steady, unblinking, the coal in his chest burning so hot he was surprised his jacket didn't smoke. I need you to stand up. I need you to walk with me to the front door, and I need you to look outside. Can you do that? She stared at him, searching his face for the lie, the trap, the angle. Because in her world, there was always an angle. She didn't find one. Slowly, painfully slowly, like someone unfolding from a position they've held for years, Avery Hale stood up. Ridge offered his hand. She didn't take it. That was fine. He walked ahead of her, through the hallway, past the living room where Maddox stood in front of Holloway like a wall of granite, his hand flat against the man's chest, keeping him pinned to the wall without a word. Holloway was talking, fast, the words coming out in a jumbled stream of denial and outrage and legal threats that crumbled even as he spoke them, because he could see in Maddox's eyes that none of it, not a single syllable, was going to change what was happening. Ridge opened the front door, stepped aside. Avery walked onto the porch and stopped. The snow had eased to a light drift, and the cloud cover had thinned enough that faint moonlight filtered through, catching the chrome of nearly 200 motorcycles and the frozen breath of the men who stood beside them. They stretched in every direction, along the driveway, between the trees, across the fields. Silent. Still. A wall of leather and scar tissue and second chances. Not predators, not criminals, not the monsters that populated every nightmare she'd ever had. Protectors. Avery's knees buckled. She grabbed the porch railing and a sound came out of her that Ridge had heard only twice in his life. A sound that wasn't crying and wasn't screaming, but something between the two, something primal. The sound a human being makes when a weight they've carried for so long they forgot it was there is suddenly, impossibly, lifted. Ridge caught her before she fell. Behind them, inside the house, Holloway made a break for it. Ridge heard it, the scramble of slippers on hardwood, the crash of a chair, and then Maddox's voice, flat and final. Sit down. A thud. Silence. Avery was shaking in Ridge's arms, not from the cold, from the release, from the chemical flood of terror converting into something her body didn't have a name for yet. They're here for you, Ridge said. Every one of them. They left their homes tonight and rode through a blizzard for you. Do you understand? She couldn't speak. She nodded. Maddox emerged from the house, dragging Holloway by the collar of his bathrobe. He walked the man to the edge of the porch and held him there, facing the army. Holloway's legs gave out. Maddox held him up. Look at them, Maddox said. Holloway made a whimpering sound. Every man out there has a story. A daughter, a sister, a mother, a kid they couldn't save. Maddox leaned close, his mouth beside Holloway's ear, his voice carrying just far enough for Ridge and Avery to hear. You picked the wrong girl. You picked the one who was brave enough to ask. In the distance, the first wail of police sirens threaded through the night air. Sparrow had made the calls, state police, FBI tip line, the county DA's direct number. She'd sent the evidence package before the first motorcycle had left the staging area. The law was coming, late, as always, but coming. Maddox released Holloway, who collapsed onto the porch like a puppet with cut strings. Then Judge unzipped his leather vest, the cut, the club's insignia on the back, the patches earned over decades of loyalty and loss, and removed it. He turned to Avery, who was still gripping the railing, still trembling, still staring at the impossible sight before her. He draped the vest over her shoulders. The leather was warm from his body. It smelled like motor oil and cold wind and the particular musk of a man who had carried the world's weight so long that it had seeped into his clothes. It was heavy, too big for her. It hung past her hips and the sleeves pooled over her hands. She pulled it tighter around herself. And for the first time in, she couldn't remember how long, Avery Hale exhaled. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue light began to pulse against the snow-covered trees at the end of the driveway. 3 state police cruisers and an unmarked sedan, FBI, Sparrow's contact, a woman named Torres who had been hunting trafficking networks in western Pennsylvania for 2 years and had never gotten close enough to touch one. Ridge watched the cruisers approach and felt something shift in the air. Relief, maybe. Or its shadow. Because he knew, in the way that broken men know things, through scar tissue and instinct rather than logic, that this wasn't the end of anything. Holloway was one man, one node. The network Sparrow had uncovered was still running, 14 other listings, 14 other faces. And behind those faces, the infrastructure, the money, the clients, the people who built and maintained and profited from the machinery of turning children into commerce. Getting Avery out was the first step. What came next would be war. Ridge stood on the porch of Grant Holloway's farmhouse, with snow melting in his hair and a 17-year-old girl's terror still warm against his chest. And he watched the blue lights paint the trees. And he understood that he had crossed a line tonight that couldn't be uncrossed. And somewhere in the frozen dark beyond the property line, a phone buzzed in a dead man's pocket. A message from Holloway that would never be answered, sent 45 minutes ago, 3 words that would haunt every mile of the road ahead. Package not secure. Someone in that network already knew. The text had been sent at 11:47 p.m. 3 words. Package not secure. By the time FBI Special Agent Torres pulled it from Holloway's phone, bagged, tagged, logged into evidence in the back of an unmarked sedan, while the snow kept falling and the red-blue lights kept spinning, the message had already been read, delivered and opened. Whoever was on the other end knew. Torres was a small woman with sharp cheekbones and the kind of calm that only comes from years spent staring at the worst things human beings do to each other without blinking. She stood on Holloway's porch with her arms crossed, watching 2 state troopers walk the handcuffed man toward a cruiser, and then she turned to Maddox. "You understand I can't thank you," she said. "Didn't ask you to. You also understand that every piece of evidence your people touched is now a defense attorney's dream." Maddox didn't flinch. Sparrow didn't touch anything. She traced publicly accessible web data. The phone was given voluntarily to a civilian. Chain of custody is clean. Torres studied him. The snow was catching in her dark hair, melting against the collar of her federal-issue parka. "You've done this before." "I've done a lot of things before." She glanced past him toward the field where the last of the motorcycles were idling, riders peeling off in small groups, disappearing back into the night. "I need statements. From you, from your man Ridge, and from the girl. The girl's name is Avery, and she's done talking tonight." "That's not Agent Torres." Maddox stepped closer, not threatening, containing. His voice dropped to a register that wasn't quite a whisper but carried no further than the 2 of them. "That child has been sold, photographed, cataloged, and displayed for purchase by a man the state of Pennsylvania put in charge of her safety. She's 17 years old, and she's sitting in the back of my truck wrapped in a leather vest because she doesn't own a coat that fits. You can have your statements. Tomorrow. Tonight, she sleeps somewhere warm." Torres held his gaze for a long 5 seconds. Then she pulled a business card from her pocket and pressed it into his palm. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. My field office in Greensburg. All 3 of you." She paused. "And Maddox? Keep your people away from that network. I mean it. This is a federal investigation now." He took the card, said nothing. Torres walked back to her sedan, and Maddox stood alone on the porch of a house that smelled like bleach and broken children, and he crushed the card in his fist, not to throw it away, but because his hands needed to crush something, and a business card was the safest option available. Ridge was sitting in the cab of Maddox's truck with the heater running. Avery was in the back seat, silent, Judge's leather vest still wrapped around her like a cocoon. She hadn't spoken since the porch, hadn't cried again. She'd gone somewhere deep inside herself, some bunker that kids like her build brick by brick over years of being hurt, and Ridge recognized the architecture because he'd built one just like it. He didn't try to reach her, didn't ask if she was okay. The question would have been obscene. Maddox climbed into the driver's seat. Snow fell from his shoulders onto the console. He sat there for a moment, both hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the FBI techs now entering the workshop with flashlights and evidence kits. "FBI's got the case," he said. I heard. She wants us to stand down. Ridge turned to look at him. And? Maddox started the engine, didn't answer the question. They drove through the storm in silence. The wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulating snow. The road was empty. Just the headlights cutting through white static and the occasional silhouette of a mailbox or a fence post emerging from the dark like a marker for a world that had stopped making sense. In the back seat, Avery's breathing finally evened out. Ridge checked the rearview mirror. She was asleep. Head tilted against the window, mouth slightly open, the vest pulled up to her chin. In sleep, she looked younger, 12 maybe. A kid. Just a kid. Where are we taking her? Ridge asked. The clubhouse. The state's going to want her in emergency placement. Yeah, they're real good at that. Maddox's voice was a blade wrapped in cotton. How'd the last placement work out for her? Ridge didn't argue. He stared at the road and listened to the heater and tried not to think about the text message. Package not secure. Someone knew. Someone on the other end of that network was now aware that Holloway was compromised, that the operation had been exposed, that a girl who was supposed to be merchandise had become a liability. And liabilities, in that world, didn't get reassigned. They got erased. The Iron Revenant Clubhouse was a converted warehouse on a dead-end street in Brenton's industrial quarter, a neighborhood of shuttered machine shops and empty lots where the only signs of life were feral cats and the occasional tweaker picking through scrap metal. The building itself was unremarkable. Corrugated steel walls, a roll-up garage door, a hand-painted sign that said private property in letters that had faded to near invisibility. Inside was a different world, a main room with a bar, pool table, and mismatched furniture that smelled like decades of spilled beer and cigarette smoke. A meeting room they called the chapel, which contained a scarred conference table and 12 chairs. And upstairs, 3 rooms with cots that served as crash pads for members who were too drunk, too tired, or too broken to go home. They put Avery in the cleanest room. Ridge found a pillow that didn't smell like motor oil and a wool blanket from the emergency supplies in the basement. She woke up long enough to register the change in location, eyes scanning the room, cataloging exits, measuring threats. And then, apparently deciding that whatever this place was, it was better than where she'd been, she pulled the blanket over her head and disappeared again. Ridge closed the door and went downstairs. It was almost 3 in the morning. The clubhouse should have been empty, but there were still a dozen men scattered around the main room, too wired to sleep, too shaken to go home. Deacon sat at the bar nursing a whiskey, his mechanic's hands wrapped around the glass like it might try to escape. Burns, the shop teacher, was on the couch with his head tipped back and his eyes closed, but he wasn't sleeping. His lips were moving, forming words in a silence that no one interrupted. Yates, the one-armed sergeant, stood by the window with his remaining hand pressed flat against the glass, staring at the parking lot where the motorcycles sat in rows under a fresh layer of snow. The room smelled like leather and cold sweat and the stale residue of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Maddox was in the chapel, alone. The door was open a crack, and Ridge could see him sitting at the head of the table with Sparrow's laptop open in front of him, the blue-white light of the screen carving his face into planes and shadows that made him look carved from stone. Or carved from grief. Same thing, sometimes. Ridge pushed the door open. "Don't," Maddox said without looking up. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're about to say." Ridge pulled a chair out and sat down anyway. The chair scraped against the concrete floor, the sound sharp enough to make Maddox's jaw tighten. They sat across from each other in the cold blue light with the table between them like a negotiating surface, and for a long moment neither spoke. 14 listings, Ridge said finally. "I know. 14 girls. I said I know." "Torres told you to stand down." Maddox closed the laptop. The room went dark except for the sliver of light from the main room leaking under the door. "Torres told me a lot of things." "And?" Maddox leaned back in his chair. In the dark, Ridge couldn't see his face, but he could hear his breathing. Slow, controlled, the kind of breathing a man does when he's holding something volatile in place. "You remember why we're sitting in this room, Ridge?" "Don't." "You remember what happened the last time you decided to run an operation without the club's vote? Without the table?" Ridge's hands went still on the armrests. "That's not what this is." That's exactly what this is. You walked into that diner alone. You took that phone alone. You called me. Not the table, not the officers, me. And you told me to send the code. You didn't ask, you told. There was a kid. There's always a kid. Maddox's voice cut through the dark like a scalpel. There's always a reason. There was a reason in Wheeling, too. You remember Wheeling? The name landed like a punch. Ridge felt it in his solar plexus, a physical contraction, the body remembering what the mind tried to forget. Wheeling. 18 months ago. A tip about a meth house where kids were being kept in the basement. Ridge had gone in hot, alone, without waiting for the club, without waiting for anyone. He'd found the kids, 3 of them, all under 10, but he'd also found 2 armed men who didn't appreciate being interrupted, and the night had ended with Ridge in an emergency room with a knife wound under his ribs, and the club spending 48 hours cleaning up a situation that had spiraled so far out of control it nearly brought an ATF investigation down on all of them. That was the fight, the one 4 months ago, the fist through the drywall, the ultimatum, walk it off or walk away. Wheeling was different, Ridge said, and even he could hear how thin it sounded. Wheeling was you deciding your pain matters more than this club's survival, and tonight was the same thing. You just got lucky that it worked. You still sent the code, because a kid was in danger and I don't have the luxury of spite. Maddox stood, his chair scraped back. He walked to the window, a small dirty rectangle that looked out onto an alley full of dumpsters and broken pallets, and stood with his back to Ridge. You walked away from us, Ridge. 4 months. No calls, no check-ins. You missed 3 votes, 2 funerals, and a prospects patching ceremony. You don't get to disappear and then come back when it's convenient and start giving orders. I wasn't giving orders. You told me to send the code. I asked. You demanded. There's a difference and you know it. Ridge opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched. In the main room, someone clinked a glass. The building creaked in the wind. You're right, Ridge said. The words came out hoarse, scraped raw, like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep and reluctant. About Wheeling, about all of it. You're right. Maddox didn't turn around. I know I'm right. That's not the point. Then what's the point? The point is that tomorrow morning we walk into a federal field office and sit across from an FBI agent who's going to look at us and see exactly what the world always sees. What? Outlaws, criminals, dangerous men who took the law into their own hands. And I need to know right now before we walk through that door whether you're with this club or whether you're still running your own war. The question filled the room. Ridge felt it pressing against his chest like a hand. I'm with the club, he said. Are you? Because the last time I trusted that, you put 3 kids in the back of an ambulance and yourself in surgery and me in a room with an ATF agent trying to explain why one of my members was found unconscious in a meth house with a knife in his side. I covered for you. I lied for you. And you thanked me by walking away. Ridge's eyes burned. Not tears. He hadn't cried since he was 11, and he wasn't starting now. But something corrosive, something that ate at the edges of his vision and made the dark room swim. I walked away because I couldn't look at you. What? After Wheeling. I couldn't look at you because you were right then too, and I knew it, and I couldn't. He stopped, breathed, started again. I've been alone my whole life, Judge. Even in this club, even surrounded by 200 men who'd die for me. I've been alone because that's the only shape I know how to be. And when you told me I was wrong in Wheeling, when you told me I was reckless and selfish and that I almost got those kids killed, you were right. And I couldn't sit at this table and look at the man who was right about me and keep pretending I wasn't exactly what he said I was. The confession hung in the dark like smoke. Maddox was quiet for a long time. The wind moaned outside. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked. You're not what I said you were, Maddox said finally. His voice had changed, quieter. The blade still there, but sheathed. You're a man with a hole in his chest where a father should have been, and you've spent 30 years trying to fill it by throwing yourself at every broken thing you see. Because if you save enough people, maybe it counts. Maybe it retroactively saves the kid you used to be. Ridge couldn't breathe. It doesn't work like that, Maddox continued. I know because I tried the same thing. For years after Danny died, every kid I helped, every rescue, every guardian call, I was looking for my son, trying to undo it, and it never undid a damn thing. He turned from the window. Ridge couldn't see his face, but he could hear the roughness in his voice, the tectonic plates of grief grinding beneath the surface. But I stopped running alone. That's the difference. I stopped pretending I was strong enough to carry it without help. And you haven't learned that yet. I'm learning. You're going to have to learn faster, because that girl upstairs, Avery, she's going to need more than a rescue. She's going to need people who show up, consistently, reliably, not just on the bad nights. I know. Do you? I know. They stood in the dark chapel, two scarred men carrying more weight than the building's foundation, and something passed between them that was neither forgiveness nor reconciliation, but something older and simpler. The acknowledgement that broken things can still hold if you shore them up from both sides. Maddox walked to the door and opened it. Light from the main room spilled in. Get some sleep. We leave for Greensburg at 7. Judge, Maddox stopped. Thank you for sending the code. The barest movement, a nod. Then he was gone. Ridge sat alone in the chapel for a long time. The laptop was still on the table. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The 14 faces were already behind his eyes. Not visible yet, not specific, but present in the way that unfinished things are present, pressing against the walls of consciousness like water behind a dam. 14. And Holloway was just a node. He went upstairs, checked on Avery without opening the door, just listened, heard the slow rhythm of breathing, and moved on. He found an empty cot in the last room, lay down on it fully clothed, boots still on, leather jacket still zipped, and stared at the ceiling while the building settled around him and the snow continued to fall outside in the dark. He did not sleep. 7 hours later, the world was white and sharp and punishingly bright. The snow had stopped, leaving 9 inches on the ground, and a sky so clear it looked like polished steel. The cold had deepened overnight. The thermometer on the clubhouse wall read 14 degrees, and every surface was coated in frost that glittered like crushed glass in the morning sun. Ridge came downstairs to find the main room transformed. Someone, Deacon probably, had made coffee. Real coffee, not the motor oil substitute that usually came out of the clubhouse machine. The smell filled the room like an intervention. Burns was cooking eggs on a portable griddle he'd brought from home. Yates was at the bar, his prosthetic arm off, using his remaining hand to sort through a box of donated clothing that someone had retrieved from the club's emergency cache. For the kid, Yates said when he caught Ridge looking. Won't be perfect, but it'll be warm. Avery came down at 6:45. She appeared at the top of the stairs like a ghost. Silent, watchful, one hand gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. She was still wearing Judge's vest over her thin jacket, and her hair had come loose from its tight pull, falling around her face in dark strands that made her look younger and more lost than she had the night before. The room went quiet. 12 men and a 17-year-old girl, all staring at each other across a space that smelled like coffee and eggs and decades of accumulated cigarette smoke. Burns was the first to move. He pulled a chair out from the nearest table, set a plate of eggs and toast in front of it, and went back to the griddle without a word. Avery descended the stairs one step at a time. She sat down, picked up a fork, looked at the plate like she'd forgotten what food was for. Then she ate. Not slowly, not delicately. She ate like someone who hadn't been given enough food in a long time, shoveling eggs into her mouth with the desperate efficiency of a body that had learned to take what it could when it could, because it might not get another chance. No one stared. Every man in that room knew hunger. If not for food, then for something else. They turned back to their coffee, their conversations, their quiet morning rituals. They gave her the most valuable thing they could, the illusion of normalcy. Ridge sat across from her with a cup of coffee he didn't drink. We have to go to the FBI this morning, he said. A woman named Torres. She'll ask you questions. Avery's fork stopped. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to, but the more you tell her, the harder it'll be for Holloway to get out of this. He won't get out of it. She said it flat. Certain. The certainty of someone who'd stopped believing the system would do its job. He'll get a lawyer, and the lawyer will say I'm lying, and the judge will believe him because he's a county administrator and I'm a foster kid with a file an inch thick. It's not going to go like that. It always goes like that. She looked at him, those gray eyes, older than 17, older than 40. You know how many times I reported him? Ridge's stomach clenched. How many? 3. The first time was to my caseworker. She said she'd investigate. She called Grant and told him I'd made a complaint. He was ready for her visit. The house was clean. I was coached. She checked a box on a form and left. The fork was trembling in her hand. She set it down. The second time was to a teacher, Mrs. Pollard, 5th period English. I wrote her a note. She gave it to the school counselor. The school counselor gave it to the principal. The principal called Grant. By the time I got home that afternoon, he'd already read the note. He kept a copy of it on the refrigerator for a week, so I'd see it every time I walked through the kitchen. The room had gone silent again. Every man listening without appearing to listen. The coffee machine gurgled and hissed. The third time? Avery's jaw tightened. The third time I called the police. A 911 operator in Westmoreland County. I told her everything. She sent a patrol car. 1 officer. He knocked on the door. Grant answered in his khakis and his smile. They talked on the porch for 10 minutes. The officer left. Grant came inside and took my phone. She picked the fork back up, stabbed an egg, ate it. That was 8 months ago. Yesterday was the first time I've had a phone since. The prepaid. The gas station phone she'd hidden from Holloway for who knew how long, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the one chance she might get. How'd you get the phone? Ridge asked. Stole it. No shame in her voice. Pure survival. Off a woman's purse at a Walmart checkout 2 weeks ago. I've been carrying it everywhere since, waiting. For what? She looked at him. Through him. Into the place where his own damage lived. For someone who looked like they'd actually do something about it. Ridge held her gaze. The coffee in his untouched cup had gone cold. He felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, not shatter, but crack. The way ice cracks on a river in early spring. A sound that means something underneath is moving. Something that was frozen is starting to flow. He stood up. Get dressed. Yates has warm clothes for you. We leave in 15 minutes. The drive to Greensburg took 40 minutes on snow-covered back roads. Maddox drove. Ridge rode shotgun. Avery sat in the back seat wearing a fleece-lined denim jacket from the donation box that was 2 sizes too big, but infinitely warmer than anything she'd had before. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the white landscape scroll past. None of them spoke. The FBI field office was a nondescript building on a commercial strip between a dentist's office and an H&R Block. Inside, it was all beige carpet and fluorescent light, and the particular institutional hum of government machinery that was simultaneously always working and never working fast enough. Torres was waiting in a conference room. She'd changed clothes since last night, dark blazer, white shirt, badge clipped to her belt. But the circles under her eyes were deeper, and there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there at the farmhouse. Sit down, she said. No pleasantries. She closed the door behind them and remained standing. We have a problem. Maddox lowered himself into a chair. Ridge stood. Avery sat at the far end of the table, making herself small. Holloway lawyered up at 4 a.m. His attorney is a man named Denton Stark, out of Pittsburgh. Name ring a bell? Ridge shook his head. Maddox's face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A tightening, a calculation. Stark represents money, Torres continued. Corporate clients, political donors, people who need problems to go away quietly. His firm doesn't take pro bono foster parent cases, which means someone is paying for Holloway's defense, and that someone has deep pockets and a vested interest in keeping Holloway's mouth shut. The network, Ridge said. The network. Torres pulled a folder from the table and opened it. Printed photographs, screenshots from the website captured before it went dark. The entire platform was scrubbed at approximately 1:15 a.m. last night. Every listing, every photo, every piece of data, gone. Sparrow's cached copies are the only evidence it existed. Maddox leaned forward. You're telling me someone nuked the whole operation in under 2 hours? I'm telling you that whoever runs this network has the resources and the technical capability to erase their entire digital footprint before the FBI could even obtain a preservation order. Torres's voice was controlled, but Ridge could hear the frustration underneath, the particular fury of someone who'd watched evidence evaporate while the bureaucracy she worked for was still filling out paperwork. Which means your friend Sparrow's data is now the single most important piece of evidence in a federal trafficking investigation. She looked at Maddox. I need that data. You'll get it. I need it today. You'll get it today. And I need your assurance, your word, Maddox, that your club will not conduct any independent operations related to this network. No surveillance, no confrontations, no midnight rides. This is an active federal case, and any interference could compromise the entire investigation. The room was very quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Avery stared at the table. Ridge stared at Maddox. Maddox stared at Torres. You have my word, he said. Torres held his gaze for 3 beats. Then she turned to Avery. Her voice softened. Not dramatically, not condescendingly, but enough to signal a shift. Avery, I need to ask you some questions. You can have anyone in this room stay with you, or you can ask them to leave. Whatever makes you more comfortable. Avery didn't look up. They stay. The interview lasted 2 hours. Torres was methodical, patient, and brutally thorough. She walked Avery through the timeline, when the abuse began, how the website was created, how clients were vetted, how sessions were scheduled. Avery answered in the same flat, factual tone she'd used at the breakfast table, as if she were describing someone else's life, someone else's body, someone else's nightmare. Ridge sat in the corner and listened and kept his hands flat on his thighs so no one could see them shaking. When it was over, Torres stepped out to make a call. Maddox went to the restroom. Avery and Ridge were alone in the conference room. You okay? He asked, and immediately hated himself for the question. No. She didn't look at him. Her fingers were tracing patterns on the table surface, absent, automatic, the nervous habit of a girl who'd spent too many hours sitting in rooms being asked questions by adults who had the power to rearrange her life. She asked about the other girls. What did you tell her? That I saw 2 of them at the house, before me, that Grant showed me their photos to show me what was expected, like a training manual. Her voice didn't waver. It was worse than wavering. It was the flatness of someone who'd processed something so monstrous that emotion could no longer attach to it. One of them was named Lily. She was 15. She had braces. Ridge's vision blurred. He blinked it clear. The other one didn't have a name, not that I heard. Grant called her 7, like a number. Avery, I didn't help them. Now her voice cracked. A fissure running through the concrete. I saw their pictures and I knew what it meant, and I didn't do anything. I took my turn. I waited. I survived. I let them disappear, and I survived. You were a child. So were they. Ridge had no answer for that. No comfort. No framework that could absorb the guilt of a 17-year-old girl who blamed herself for not saving other children from a monster while she was being consumed by the same monster. He sat there in a beige conference room under fluorescent lights, and the distance between what the world was and what it should have been yawned open before him like a canyon. Torres came back. Her face was different, tight. Something had happened during the phone call. We need to move the girl, she said, looking at Maddox, who had returned and was standing in the doorway. Move her where? Protective custody, a secure location outside the district. There's a safe house in... No. Ridge stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. No safe houses. No secure locations. No government facility where she's a case number in a database that leaks. Mr. Callahan, you just told us someone with deep pockets scrubbed an entire network in 2 hours. You told us Holloway's lawyer is a corporate fixer who doesn't take foster cases. And now you want to put Avery in a federal safe house? How secure is your system, Agent Torres? How many people have access to that database? How many of them can be bought? Torres's eyes hardened. That's not 3 times. Ridge's voice was louder now than he wanted it to be, but the volume had its own momentum. She reported what was happening 3 times, to a caseworker, to a teacher, to 911. The system failed her 3 times, and you're standing here asking me to hand her back to the same system. Torres stepped closer, not backing down. I'm standing here telling you that there is a credible threat to this girl's safety, that we have reason to believe the network will attempt to eliminate witnesses, and that a biker clubhouse in Brenton, Pennsylvania is not a secure facility. I am trying to keep her alive. The two of them stood 3 feet apart, locked in the kind of standoff that doesn't involve weapons but carries the same charge. The fluorescent lights hummed. Avery sat at the table, very still, watching 2 adults argue about her life as if she weren't in the room. "She stays with us," Maddox said. Everyone turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, face unreadable. His voice was low and even and carried the finality of a judge, the real kind, not the nickname, handing down a sentence. "She stays with the club. We have the manpower, the perimeter security, and the motivation. Your safe houses are in databases. Your agents rotate shifts. Your protocols have gaps." He uncrossed his arms and stood straight. "I have 200 men who will stand around the clock for as long as it takes. No shifts, no gaps, no databases." Torres looked at him, looked at Ridge, looked at Avery. "If anything happens to her, nothing will happen to her. If it does, it's on you, personally." "It's been on me personally since the moment I sent that code." Torres exhaled through her nose, a controlled, frustrated release of air that carried the weight of every jurisdictional battle she'd ever fought and lost. 48 hours. That's what I can give you. After that, I need her in federal protection or I go to a judge. 48 hours, Maddox agreed. They left the field office at noon. The sun was blinding on the snow, turning the parking lot into a field of white fire. Ridge squinted against it, his head pounding from no sleep, and too much adrenaline and the particular exhaustion that comes from spending 2 hours listening to a child describe her own commodification. Maddox was 3 steps ahead of him, moving toward the truck. Ridge caught up. "Judge." "Yeah." "That message on Holloway's phone, package not secure. Sparrow traced the recipient?" Maddox didn't slow down. "She's working on it. And it bounced through 8 relays and landed on a server registered to a shell company in Delaware that dissolved 6 months ago." He opened the truck door. "Whoever's on the other end doesn't want to be found. They'll try to find her." Maddox looked at him over the roof of the truck. His eyes were bloodshot, the lines in his face deeper than they'd been 12 hours ago. He looked like a man carrying the cumulative weight of every rescue the club had ever conducted, every child they'd pulled from darkness, every night spent standing guard against a world that manufactured predators faster than anyone could catch them. "Yeah," he said. "They will." They drove back to Brenton. Ridge rode his Harley, following the truck on roads that had been plowed but not salted. The cold was savage. It found the gap between his gloves and his sleeves, the strip of exposed skin above his collar, the tear duct of his left eye that watered constantly in wind below 20 degrees. By the time they reached the clubhouse, his hands were claws on the handlebars, and his face was numb from the jawline down. Inside, the clubhouse had been transformed again. While they'd been at the FBI, the morning crew had been replaced by a rotating guard, 4 men at each entrance, 2 on the roof with binoculars. Sparrow had set up a communications station in the chapel, 3 laptops, 2 phones, a police scanner, and a whiteboard covered in her small, precise handwriting. Ridge walked in and stopped. The whiteboard. He stared at it. Sparrow had mapped the network. Not completely. There were gaps, question marks, dotted lines connecting nodes that hadn't been confirmed, but the shape of it was there. 14 listings, each connected to a handler. The handlers connected to regional coordinators. The coordinators connected to a central node that Sparrow had labeled with a single word in red marker, circled 3 times. "Warden." "Who's Warden?" Ridge asked. Sparrow didn't look up from her laptop. "That's the name that keeps appearing in the metadata. Every listing, every transaction record I recovered before the scrub, every encrypted communication Holloway sent, they all reference a warden as the approval authority. Nothing moves in this network without Warden's sign-off." A person. Maybe a position. Could be a title that rotates. She pulled up a screen. "But here's what I do know. 12 hours before we hit Holloway's house, Warden approved a new listing, number 15. Ridge felt the floor tilt beneath him. Who? Sparrow turned the laptop to face him. A screenshot. Cached data pulled from the destroyed website in the 90 seconds between Holloway's text and the network's purge. A photograph. A girl. Younger than Avery. 13, maybe 14. Brown hair, freckles. The same blank, evacuated expression that Ridge had seen on Avery's face in the diner. And beneath the photograph, a notation that Sparrow had highlighted in yellow. Location, active. Handler, confirmed. Available, 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days. In 3 days, someone's child would be sold for the first time, and the man or woman or thing called Warden had already approved it. Ridge looked at Sparrow. Sparrow looked at Ridge. Neither of them looked at Maddox, who was standing in the doorway, because they already knew what he was going to say. Torres had given them 48 hours. Torres had told them to stand down. Torres had the full faith and resources of the federal government behind her, and those resources were currently failing to trace a single text message. Somewhere out there, a girl they'd never met had 72 hours before she became listing number 15, and the clock was already running. Ridge turned to Maddox. The question wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. It lived in the air between them, electric, inevitable. The same question that had lived between them for years, the question that defined the Iron Revenants, that had built and nearly destroyed them, that separated the men who wore the patch from the men who merely talked about justice. Do we wait for the system, or do we go? Maddox looked at the whiteboard, at the red circle around Warden, at the photograph on Sparrow's screen, at the clock on the wall that read 12:47 p.m. He picked up his phone and dialed the burner. One word, 6 letters, sent to every phone in the network, Guardian. And just like that, there was no turning back. The second Guardian code hit the network at 12:49 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, and this time, the response was different. This time, the men who answered it knew they weren't riding toward a rescue. They were riding toward a war they couldn't see, against an enemy they couldn't name, on a clock that someone else controlled. Sparrow had 46 hours before listing 15 went active. Torres had given them 48 hours before she went to a judge. The math was a vice, and every hour that passed tightened it. By 3 o'clock, the clubhouse was operating like a forward command post. Sparrow had commandeered the chapel entirely. The scarred conference table now buried under laptops, external hard drives, tangled charging cables, and a growing collection of coffee cups that marked her hours of work like rings in a tree. She'd brought in a second analyst, a quiet kid named Bite, who was 24 and looked 19 and had the particular haunted pallor of someone who spent more time in front of screens than sunlight. Bite had done 2 years in Army signals intelligence before a discharge that nobody in the club asked about, and he could trace a cryptocurrency transaction through a blockchain the way a bloodhound follows scent through rain. They worked in near silence. The only sounds were keystrokes, the occasional murmur of discovery, and the police scanner crackling in the corner like a mechanical conscience. Ridge stood in the doorway, watching. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. His eyes felt like they'd been packed with sand, and there was a tremor in his left hand that he couldn't stop. Not the emotional kind, just the body's way of saying it was running on fumes and resentment, and the particular fuel that comes from knowing a child you've never met has a countdown attached to her life. "Talk to me," he said. Sparrow didn't look up. The cryptocurrency wallets connected to Holloway's transactions feed into a mixing service, essentially a digital laundry. Money goes in dirty, comes out clean, gets redistributed to wallets I can't trace without subpoena power I don't have. So it's a dead end. I didn't say that. She pulled up a screen filled with alphanumeric strings that looked like gibberish to Ridge. The mixing service has a flaw. It batches transactions in 6-hour windows. Every batch has a timestamp. I cross-referenced those timestamps with the listing activation records I cached before the scrub, and I found a pattern. Every new listing goes active exactly 72 hours after a payment clears to a specific wallet. That wallet belongs to whoever approves the listing. Warden. And here's where it gets interesting. She turned to face him, and Ridge noticed for the first time that her eyes were red, not from tears, from 18 hours of staring at data that described the sale of children in the language of commerce. The approval payment for listing 15 cleared at 6 p.m. yesterday. 6 hours before we hit Holloway's house, which means whoever Warden is, they approved a new victim while Holloway was sitting in a diner with Avery, completely unaware that the whole thing was about to collapse. Warden doesn't know about Holloway? Warden didn't know at the time. They know now. The question is what they do about it. They scrubbed the site. That's defensive. I'm talking about offensive. Holloway is in custody, and he's a liability. The girl who reported him is in the wind, and listing 15 is still out there with a handler who's expecting delivery. Sparrow paused. If I were Warden, I'd be doing 3 things right now: cleaning house, accelerating the timeline on 15, and hunting for Avery. The word hung in the air. Hunting. Ridge's hand stopped trembling. Something colder replaced it. How do we find Warden? I'm working on it. But Ridge, even if I crack the wallet, even if I trace it to a real identity, we're talking about someone with the resources to run a multi-state operation, pay a corporate attorney on retainer, and wipe a digital platform in under 2 hours. This isn't a guy in a basement. This is infrastructure. Sparrow. What? How do we find the girl? Listing 15. Sparrow hesitated. It was the first time Ridge had ever seen her hesitate. She turned back to her screen. The cached listing had a handler code, not a name. The handler code matches a pattern I've seen in 3 other listings, all in Western Pennsylvania, all girls between 13 and 16. 1 handler, 4 girls. At minimum. Where? That's what I'm trying to find. She cracked her knuckles. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Give me time. We don't have time. Then give me space. Ridge left the chapel, walked through the main room where 8 men sat in various postures of waiting, cleaning boots, checking phones, staring at walls. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of leather and the burned coffee reek of a pot that had been sitting on the warmer too long. He pushed through the side door and into the parking lot. The cold hit him like a slap. The sun was low and weak, casting long shadows across the snow. His Harley sat where he'd left it, frost crystallizing on the handlebars, the chrome exhaust pipes catching the amber light in a way that made them look like something forged rather than manufactured. He lit a cigarette. Hadn't smoked in 3 months, but he'd bummed one from Deacon an hour ago, and now it was between his fingers, the first drag hitting his lungs with that familiar burn that was half punishment and half comfort. The smoke curled upward in the still air, blue-gray against the white sky. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it. Let it ring twice, 3 times. Answered. Mr. Callahan. The voice was male, calm, educated. The diction precise, each syllable measured, the accent scrubbed clean of any regional marker. The voice of someone who had been trained to sound like no one. We need to have a conversation. Ridge's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. Who is this? Someone who knows where you are, who you're with, and what you took from Grant Holloway's house last night. The parking lot seemed to narrow. The cold got colder. Ridge turned slowly, scanning the street. The empty lots, the shuttered shops, the rusted chain-link fences. Nothing moved. No cars. No pedestrians. Just the desolate geometry of a dead industrial neighborhood in winter. I'm listening, Ridge said. The girl is a complication. Complications can be resolved in many ways. Some are cleaner than others. If you're threatening a 17-year-old, but I'm offering perspective, Mr. Callahan. The organization Mr. Holloway was associated with provides a service. The disruption of that service has consequences, not just for us, for the clients who rely on it. Clients with significant resources and very little tolerance for exposure. Ridge's hand was steady now, dead steady. The kind of steady that comes when the body recognizes a predator and every unnecessary function shuts down to feed the core systems. Your warden. A pause. The faintest sound of breathing on the other end. Not labored. Controlled. The breathing of someone who was enjoying this. That's a name Mr. Holloway used. I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator. I think of you as a dead man. Colorful, but impractical. You're a motorcycle club with strong feelings and limited capabilities. I'm a logistics operation with reach you can't imagine. The FBI agent you spoke to this morning, Torres, She's been investigating trafficking networks in this region for 2 years. Do you know how many arrests she's made? Ridge said nothing. 0. Not because she's incompetent, because the system she operates within is designed to move slowly, and the people I work with are designed to move fast. By the time her subpoena's clear, there's nothing left to subpoena. By the time her warrants are signed, the evidence is in a country without an extradition treaty. Another pause. I'm telling you this so you understand the landscape, so you can make an informed decision. What decision? Return the cache data your associate Sparrow extracted from our platform. Withdraw your protection of Avery Hale. Allow her to be returned to the foster care system, where she will be relocated to a facility outside your reach. In exchange, I will ensure that listing 15 is deactivated. 1 girl saved, 1 girl returned. A net gain, by any reasonable calculus. The cigarette burned down to Ridge's fingers. He didn't feel it. The pain was somewhere else, somewhere deep in his chest where the coal had been burning since the diner, and now it was white-hot, incandescent, and the voice on the other end of the phone was pouring gasoline on it. You want me to trade one kid for another. I want you to recognize that you're outmatched, that every hour you spend playing protector is an hour that listing 15 moves closer to activation, that the FBI cannot help you, that the police cannot help you, that the only person who can stop what's about to happen to that child is me, and my price is reasonable. Ridge closed his eyes. The darkness behind his lids was not empty. It was full of faces, Avery's, the girl in the photograph, the one with freckles, Lily, who had braces and was 15, the one Holloway called 7. All the faces he hadn't seen yet, all the listings, all the numbers. I have a counteroffer, Ridge said. I'm listening. Run. Silence. Because I'm coming for you. And when I find you, and I will find you, I'm going to hand you to the FBI wrapped in enough evidence to bury you in a federal prison for the rest of your natural life. And every day you spend inside, you'll know it was because a 17-year-old girl in a diner was braver than your entire operation. The line was quiet for 5 seconds. 7, 10. Then the voice spoke again, and the calm was gone, not replaced by anger, by something worse, amusement. Mr. Callahan, check the news. The line went dead. Ridge stood in the parking lot with the dead phone pressed to his ear and the burned cigarette crushed between his fingers. Then he moved. Through the side door, through the main room, past the men who looked up at the sound of his boots hitting the floor too fast, into the chapel where Sparrow was already staring at her screen with a face Ridge had never seen her wear before. White, completely white, as if all the blood had been pulled from her skin by a vacuum. Sparrow. She pointed at the screen. A news feed. Local. WBRE Eyewitness News out of Wilkes Bar. Breaking banner across the top. Ridge leaned in and read it, and the floor dropped out from under the world. Westmoreland County foster care worker found dead in home. Police investigating. The name was in the 3rd paragraph. Donna Kessler, age 44. Caseworker for the Westmoreland County Department of Children and Youth Services. Found by her husband at approximately 1 p.m. in the couple's Latrobe residence. Cause of death not yet determined, but sources describe the scene as suspicious. Donna Kessler, the caseworker assigned to Avery Hale's placement with Grant Holloway. When? Ridge asked. Time of death isn't confirmed, but the article says the husband came home from a dentist appointment and found her. That's approximately an hour ago. Sparrow's voice was flat, technical, the way it got when the content she was processing exceeded her emotional bandwidth and the analytical systems took over. Ridge. She was Avery's caseworker. I know who she was. She was also the caseworker who scheduled those advance visits. The one who gave Holloway warning. The one who... I know what she did. Maddox appeared in the doorway. He'd heard. His face was the face of a man recalculating every assumption he'd operated under for the past 24 hours. They're cleaning house, Maddox said. The man on the phone called it resolving complications, Ridge said, and then told them. All of it. The call, the voice, the offer, the threat. He repeated it word for word, his memory sharpened by adrenaline into something photographic. And when he finished, the chapel was so quiet he could hear the fluorescent tube above them buzzing at a frequency that felt like a drill bit against his temple. Maddox pulled a chair out and sat down. He didn't sit so much as lower himself, the way a building settles on a compromised foundation, his elbows on the table, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance that only he could see. He called your personal phone, Maddox said. Yes. Not the club phone, not Sparrow's line. Your cell. The implications settled over the room like a toxic fog. Ridge's personal number was not public. It was not on any website, not in any directory. The club members had it, a handful of old contacts, and the cell carrier whose records could be accessed by law enforcement with a warrant or by anyone else with enough money to buy a data broker. They know who I am, Ridge said. They probably know who all of us are. That changes things. It changes everything. Sparrow was already typing. I'm running a check on the club's phone records. If someone pulled metadata on our membership... Sparrow. Maddox's voice stopped her. Not loud, just heavy. The caseworker is dead. I know. That means Warden isn't just running, he's killing. And he's doing it in broad daylight, in a residential neighborhood, while an active FBI investigation is running. Maddox looked at Ridge. This isn't a trafficking network. Then what is it? It's an organization. Trafficking is the product. But the infrastructure, the lawyers, the tech, the speed, the willingness to kill a county employee 12 hours into a federal case, that's not a trafficking ring. That's something else. The word neither of them said aloud filled the space between them. Organized. Not motorcycle club organized, not street-level organized. The other kind. The kind with offices and letterheads and people who wore suits and smiled at fundraising dinners and slept soundly in houses with alarm systems because the things they did to the world happened at a distance, through intermediaries, through men like Holloway who were useful and disposable in equal measure. We need to tell Torres, Ridge said. Torres knows. If she doesn't know yet, she will within the hour. And then what? She issues more subpoenas, files more requests, while Warden kills witnesses and sells children on a 72-hour clock? What do you want to do, Ridge? Maddox's voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly do you want to do? Ride into the dark again? Kick down another door? Because last time you did that, it worked, and this time it won't. Last time we were dealing with one man in a farmhouse. Now we're dealing with an organization that can identify club members by phone number, kill a county employee in her living room, and wipe a digital platform between midnight and dawn. So we do nothing. We do what we're good at. We protect the girl we have. We give Sparrow time to work. We cooperate with the FBI and we let the system... The system killed a woman today, Judge. Ridge's voice cracked, not with weakness, with the pressure of containing something that was too large for the space it occupied. The system put Avery in that house. The system ignored her reports. The system is why we're here. And the system just let Donna Kessler die in her kitchen while it was busy filling out forms. The chapel held the silence like a wound holds blood. Maddox closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted, not softened, not hardened, but reconfigured. The look of a commander who'd just received intel that changed the battle plan. Sparrow, he said, the handler code for listing 15. How many hours to trace it to a physical location? Depends on the trail. Could be 6 hours. Could be 12. Make it 6. Judge, 6 hours. Whatever you need, whatever Bite needs, whatever resources this club has. 6 hours. Sparrow nodded, turned back to her screens. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the controlled ferocity of someone who understood that every minute of delay was a minute of a child's vanishing safety. Maddox stood. Ridge, with me. They walked through the main room, past the men who had stopped pretending not to listen, and out the front door into the parking lot where the late afternoon light was turning the snow from white to gold to gray. The temperature was dropping again. The sun was already low, tangled in the bare branches of the trees across the street. Maddox walked to the edge of the lot and stopped at the chain-link fence that bordered the alley. He gripped the fence with both hands, his fingers curling through the frozen metal, and he stood there looking at nothing. Danny was 7, he said. Ridge stopped walking. He hadn't heard Maddox say his son's name in over a year. Leukemia, diagnosed at 5, gone at 7. 2 years of hospitals and chemicals and the kind of hope that's really just delayed despair. Maddox's grip tightened on the fence. The metal creaked. After he died, I spent 6 months trying to find someone to blame. The doctors, the insurance company, his mother, myself. I needed an enemy because grief without a target it's just weather. It just happens to you. The wind picked up. It carried the smell of diesel from the highway and the faint metallic tang of snow that was coming. When I started the Revenants, it was because I found the enemy. Not the disease, the world, the whole rotten architecture that lets kids suffer while the adults who are supposed to protect them look the other way. That's the enemy. Not one man, not one network. The entire system of indifference that makes it possible. He turned to face Ridge. His eyes were dry but destroyed. The eyes of a man who had cried himself empty years ago and now existed in the aftermath. But here's what I learned, and it took me a decade to learn it. You can't fight the architecture. You can't burn it down and build something better. All you can do is stand in the gap. Be the wall. One kid at a time, one night at a time. And the moment you start trying to be more than that, the moment you try to be the sword instead of the shield, you become the thing you're fighting. You become the man who justifies anything because the cause is righteous. I hear you, Ridge said, but there's a girl out there with 72 hours. I know. And a dead caseworker who was probably killed because she knew too much. I know that too. And an organization that just called my personal phone to negotiate the sale of a human being. Maddox released the fence. His hands were red from the cold and the pressure, the chain link pattern imprinted on his palms like a brand. We go after listing 15, he said. Sparrow finds the handler. We locate the girl. We extract her the same way we extracted Avery. He raised a finger. But that's it. We save the kid. We hand the evidence to Torres. We do not go hunting for Warden. We do not engage with the network. We do not become vigilantes. And if Warden comes hunting for us, then we're the wall. It was the closest thing to a plan they had. It was also, Ridge understood, a compromise between what was necessary and what was survivable. Maddox was drawing a line, not in the sand, because sand shifts, but in the bedrock of what the club was and what it couldn't become without destroying itself. Ridge nodded. It wasn't agreement exactly. It was acknowledgement. The difference mattered. They went back inside. The sky was darkening fast, the early winter dusk pulling a curtain across the horizon. The clubhouse lights came on, bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling joists, casting hard shadows that made every face look older and more angular, carved from something dense and unforgiving. Ridge went upstairs to check on Avery. He found her sitting on the cot in the back room, cross-legged, the oversized fleece jacket draped around her shoulders. She was holding Judge's leather vest in her lap, running her fingers over the patches. The club insignia, the chapter rocker, the small embroidered memorial patches for fallen members. She traced each one with a fingertip, the way a scholar reads Braille. "Those are people," Ridge said from the doorway. She looked up. "What?" "The small patches, the ones with dates. Each one is a member we lost. Some to accidents, some to their own demons, one to cancer, 2 overseas." He leaned against the doorframe. "That vest is a history book." Avery looked back down at the leather. Her finger was resting on a patch that read Danny M. 2014. Who was Danny? Ridge's throat tightened. Judge's son. Avery was quiet for a long time. She continued to trace the patch, and then she folded the vest carefully and set it beside her on the cot, as if she understood that she was holding something more valuable than leather and thread. "The caseworker is dead," she said. Not a question. Ridge went still. "How do you know that?" "I heard you. Downstairs. The walls are thin." She looked at him with those gray eyes, and in them Ridge saw something new. Not the terror from the diner, not the numbness from the farmhouse, but a cold, clear comprehension that was far older than 17. "He killed her because of me. He killed her because she was a loose end. That's not your fault." "Everything is my fault." She said it without self-pity, pure geometry. "I gave you the phone. I started this. And now someone is dead, and there's another girl out there who's going to be... Stop. I could end it if I go back, if I let them take me back. Whoever called you. He said he'd stop the other listing, right? If I go back, that girl, Avery. Ridge crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt in front of her, the same way he'd knelt in Holloway's house, his knees protesting, his leather jacket creaking. He didn't touch her, just positioned himself at her eye level, close enough that she couldn't look away. You are not a bargaining chip. You are not a trade. You are not something to be exchanged for someone else's safety. You are a person, a whole, complete, irreplaceable person. And no one gets to put a price on you. Not Holloway, not Warden, not even you. Her chin trembled. The armor she'd been building since she was old enough to need it showed its first structural crack. What if they can't find her in time? They'll find her. What if they can't? Ridge held her gaze. He wanted to lie. Every instinct, every protective impulse, every fragment of the father he'd never been told him to lie, to promise, to say the thing that would make the fear go away. But Avery Hale had spent her life being lied to by adults who promised safety and delivered devastation, and she would spot a lie the way a sniper spots movement. Then we'll find the next one, he said, and the one after that, and we won't stop. That's not a promise that everything will be okay. It's a promise that we won't quit. Avery stared at him, measuring, weighing, testing the words against every broken promise that had come before. Then she nodded. Small, barely visible, but real. Ridge stood. His knees popped like gunshots. He turned to leave and was halfway through the door when her voice stopped him. Ridge. He looked back. The second girl. The one before me. The one Grant called 7. Avery's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something moving in deep water. I lied to the FBI agent. I told Torres I didn't know anything about her. The room contracted. Ridge felt the walls move inward, the ceiling drop, the air thicken. Why? Because I know who she is. I know her real name. I know where she was sent after Grant's house. Avery's hands were clenched in her lap so tightly the tendons stood out like cables beneath her skin. Her name is Marin. She was 14. And I didn't tell Torres because the person who moved Marin out of Grant's house and into the network, the person I saw, the person who came to the door and took her, wasn't a stranger. Ridge couldn't breathe. The hallway behind him seemed to elongate, stretching into an impossible distance, and Avery's face at the end of it was the only fixed point in a world that had started spinning. Who was it? Avery looked at him, and her eyes held something that was not fear, but the thing that comes after fear, the thing that lives on the other side of the worst knowledge a person can carry. It was a woman, Avery said. She was wearing a federal badge, and the man on the porch, Grant, he called her by name. The air left the room. He called her Torres. Ridge's vision went white, then black, then settled into a narrow tunnel of clarity that contained only Avery's face and the words she'd just spoken and the complete catastrophic recalibration of everything he thought he knew. Torres. FBI Special Agent Torres. The woman who'd taken their statements, who'd demanded Sparrow's data, who'd been given the club's location, Avery's location, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. The woman who'd been hunting trafficking networks for 2 years and made 0 arrests. Not because the system was slow, but because the hunter was the architect. The fox had been guarding the henhouse, and they had handed her the keys. Ridge stood in the doorway of a room in a converted warehouse in Brenton, Pennsylvania, with a 17-year-old girl's whispered confession ringing in his ears, and he understood, with the total bone-deep certainty of a man who has just stepped on a landmine and heard the click, that the iron revenants were not just outmatched, they were surrounded. And the only person who knew it was a child who had learned, through years of systematic destruction, to trust no one, and who had just for the second time in her life trusted a scarred stranger with the most dangerous thing she possessed. The truth. Ridge didn't move for 11 seconds. He counted them the way a man counts the seconds between lightning and thunder, each one a measure of how close the strike, how deep the damage, how far the shockwave would travel before it stopped destroying things. 11 seconds. Then he moved. He closed the door to Avery's room, gently. The click of the latch was the softest sound he'd made in 36 hours, and it required more control than anything else he'd done. More than the ride through the blizzard, more than the walk up Holloway's driveway, more than the phone call with Warden. Because what he wanted to do was rip the door off its hinges and scream down the stairwell until the walls cracked, and instead he pressed the latch closed with his thumb and stood in the hallway with one hand flat against the door and breathed. One breath, two, three. Then he went downstairs and into the chapel and closed that door too, and this time the click wasn't gentle. It was a gunshot. Sparrow and Bite looked up from their screens. "Everyone out except Sparrow," Ridge said. Bite glanced at Sparrow. She nodded once. He gathered his laptop and left. The door closed behind him. "Torres is dirty." Sparrow's fingers froze above the keyboard. Her face didn't change. She was too disciplined for that. But her eyes did. They went from focused to flat in a fraction of a second, the way a screen goes dark when the power cuts. "Say that again?" "Avery saw her at Holloway's house, before the raid. Torres was the one who moved a girl named Marin out of Holloway's care and into the network. Holloway addressed her by name. Avery witnessed it." Sparrow leaned back in her chair. The springs creaked. She stared at Ridge for a long time, and then she turned to her laptop and started typing with a speed and precision that made the keyboard sound like a machine gun. "Sparrow, I'm checking." Her voice was thin, stretched tight over something that was either fury or terror or both. "Torres's case history. 2 years in Western Pennsylvania. Trafficking investigations." Keys clattered. Screens changed. Data scrolled. 7 investigations opened. 0 arrests, 0 prosecutions, every single case closed due to, quote, insufficient evidence or witness unavailability. Witness unavailability. Witnesses who recanted, witnesses who moved, witnesses who... She stopped typing, stared at the screen. One witness who died, 18 months ago. A 14-year-old girl in Uniontown. Ruled a runaway, found dead 3 months later in a drainage culvert in West Virginia. Case closed. The room was very quiet. The fluorescent light above them buzzed. Outside, through the walls, they could hear the low murmur of the men in the main room, the clink of a glass, someone coughing. "She's Warden," Sparrow whispered. "Or she works for Warden." "No." Sparrow shook her head, and there was something in the motion that was too emphatic, too certain, the recognition of a pattern she should have seen before. "She is Warden. Think about it. She has access to foster care databases through joint task forces. She controls which investigations move forward and which die. She knows every law enforcement operation before it happens. She can steer resources away from the network and toward dead ends. She can identify and eliminate witnesses under the cover of federal authority." Sparrow's hands were trembling now. "She asked for our data, Ridge. She asked for everything, Sparrow. Everything I had. Every piece of evidence. Every cached page. Every transaction record." "Did you give it to her?" "Not yet. I told Maddox I needed to verify the chain of custody first. I was stalling because something felt wrong, but I couldn't..." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "I should have seen it. You couldn't have. I should have." She dropped her hands. Her eyes were red and bright and furious. "The metadata. The Warden approval wallet. I've been tracing it through cryptocurrency mixers and proxy servers for 18 hours. But if Torres has access to FBI digital forensics infrastructure, she could route payments through the Bureau's own secure networks. The mixing service I've been trying to crack, it's not a criminal tool. It's a modified version of a federal asset seizure tracking system. I recognized the architecture, but I thought it was a coincidence. Is there any chance Avery is wrong? Mistaken identity?" Avery sat across from Torres for 2 hours this morning and didn't say a word about it. She's not confused about who she saw. She's terrified of who she saw. Sparrow pulled up a photograph on her screen. Torres's official FBI portrait, downloaded from the Bureau's public database. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, professional smile. She told Torres nothing because she recognized her from Holloway's house, and she knew that telling the truth in that room would get her killed. Ridge felt the room tilt. The 17-year-old upstairs had sat across a table from the woman who ran the network that had sold her, had looked into the face of the architect of her destruction, and had kept her mouth shut, had answered questions for 2 hours with the calm precision of a hostage who knows the captor is listening. had performed normalcy while the person who could erase her sat 3 feet away and smiled. The courage required for that was beyond anything Ridge had ever demonstrated in his life. "Where's Maddox?" he asked. "Main room." Ridge found him at the bar, alone, nursing a glass of water. Not bourbon. Water. Maddox had been sober for 6 years, but he kept a glass in his hand during tense situations because the ritual of holding something, lifting it, setting it down, the mechanics of drinking without the drink, kept his hands occupied and his mind ordered. Ridge sat on the stool beside him and told him everything. Maddox didn't interrupt. He listened with his eyes fixed on the mirror behind the bar. A cracked, smoky piece of glass that reflected the room in fragments, like a broken memory. When Ridge finished, Maddox set his glass down with a precision that was almost surgical. "How sure are you?" "Avery is sure. Sparrow's data supports it." Avery is 17 and traumatized. Defense attorneys eat traumatized witnesses for breakfast. This isn't a courtroom, Judge. Everything is a courtroom eventually. Maddox turned to face him. The lines in his face were deeper than they'd been that morning, as if the last 12 hours had aged him a year for every hour. "Torres has our location. She has our names. She knows Avery is here. If she's what you say she is, if she's Warden, then she already knows we're a threat, and the 48-hour window she gave us isn't a deadline. It's a countdown." "To what?" "To whatever she's planning. You don't give someone 48 hours out of generosity. You do it because you need 48 hours to arrange something." The implication sank through Ridge's body like cold water. Torres had stood in this very building's parking lot trajectory. She'd seen the security. She'd counted the men. She'd assessed the perimeter, all of it framed as concern for Avery's safety, all of it actually reconnaissance. "We need to move," Ridge said. "Where?" "Anywhere that isn't here." "We move 200 men and a teenage witness without Torres finding out? How?" "She has federal surveillance resources. She can ping our phones. She can track our vehicles. She can put a drone over this building in 20 minutes. Then we don't move 200. We move 5. Me, you, Avery, Sparrow, and one more. Everyone else stays. Maintains the appearance. Keeps the lights on. Keeps the bikes in the lot." Maddox considered. His thumb traced the rim of his water glass. Slow circles. The unconscious geometry of a mind processing variables. 5 people. Where? Sparrow has 6 hours to trace listing 15 to a physical location. We take Avery and we go dark. Burner phones only. Cash only. No digital footprint. We find listing 15 before Torres finds us. And then? We get the girl, we get the evidence, and we take it to someone who isn't Torres. Who? Her supervisor? The field office SAC? How far up does this go? I don't know, but it doesn't go everywhere. It can't. One dirty agent can hide in a bureaucracy. A conspiracy of dozens can't. Maddox stared at him. In the mirror, their reflections looked like ghosts. 2 men in leather, worn down to the wire, making decisions in a bar at the end of the world. 1 hour, Maddox said. Sparrow preps a go bag. Bite stays here and runs the decoy operation. Deacon takes command of the clubhouse. We leave through the alley at dark. 1 hour. Maddox stood, paused. The 5th person. Yates. Why Yates? Because he's got 1 arm and 0 quit, and he can shoot left-handed better than any man I know can shoot with 2. Maddox almost smiled. Almost. The muscles engaged, but the expression never fully formed, caught between grim approval and the weight of what they were about to do. 1 hour, he repeated, and walked away. The next 57 minutes were a controlled demolition of everything the Iron Revenants had built over the past 2 days. Sparrow copied her data to 3 encrypted drives and wiped the originals from her laptops. She gave 1 drive to Bite with instructions to deliver it to a journalist she trusted if they didn't check in within 24 hours. She gave the 2nd to Deacon with the same instruction, but a different journalist. The 3rd she kept. Maddox briefed Deacon in the chapel with the door closed. When they emerged, Deacon's face was the color of concrete, but his jaw was set and his hands were steady. He would hold the clubhouse. He would maintain the pattern. Lights, noise, visible guards, the appearance of a fortress that still contained its prize. If Torres came, When Torres came, he would stall. He would demand warrants. He would invoke attorneys. He would buy time with the only currency available, the bureaucratic friction of a system that Torres herself had exploited for years. Yates was told at 5:15 p.m. He listened, nodded, and went to his bike. When he came back, he was carrying a canvas duffel bag that clanked when he set it down, and nobody asked what was inside. At 5:47 p.m., with the last gray light of the winter day bleeding from the sky, Ridge went upstairs one final time. Avery was standing at the window, looking out at the parking lot. She'd seen the preparations, the quiet conversations, the duffel bags, the way men moved through the building with the purposeful urgency of people who were leaving. "We're going," she said. Not a question. "Yeah. Because of what I told you about Torres. Because of what you told me." She turned from the window. In the failing light, her face was half shadow, half pale skin, and her gray eyes caught the last of the daylight like water in a well. "Where?" "I don't know yet. Sparrow's working on it." "You're going after the other girl, listing 15. "Yes." "I want to come." "You are coming. That's the point. We're not leaving you here." "No." She stepped toward him. I want to help. I know things. About the network. About how they move girls. About the protocol." Her voice was steady, and beneath the steadiness was something hard and bright. Not anger, not revenge, but the particular determination of a person who has survived something unsurvivable and discovered that survival alone is not enough. "I spent 11 months watching, listening, learning, because I knew someday I'd either escape or I'd die, and if I escaped, I wanted to be able to burn it all down." Ridge looked at her, 17 years old, 87 pounds of scar tissue and steel. A girl who had stolen a phone, chosen a stranger, and set in motion the destruction of an empire, and who was now standing in a warehouse in a fleece jacket 2 sizes too big, volunteering to walk back into the darkness she'd barely crawled out of. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. That's why I want to." At 6:02 p.m., 5 people slipped through the back door of the Iron Revenant clubhouse, crossed the alley, climbed over a chain-link fence, and disappeared into the network of back streets and service roads that threaded through Brenton's industrial quarter. Maddox's truck was parked 4 blocks away, in the lot of an abandoned lumberyard where Yates had moved it an hour earlier. No GPS unit. Battery disconnected from Maddox's personal phone, which was sitting on the bar back at the clubhouse, still receiving messages, still pinging cell towers, still telling anyone who was tracking it that its owner hadn't moved. They drove south on back roads with the headlights off until they cleared the town limits, then east on Route 119 toward the Laurel Highlands, climbing into the mountains where the roads got narrower and the cell coverage got weaker and the darkness got deeper. Sparrow worked from the back seat with a laptop balanced on her knees. The screen brightness turned to minimum, the blue light making her face look like a mask floating in the void. Byte had given her a portable signal booster before they left, and she was using it to maintain a tenuous connection to the encrypted databases she'd been mining. "I've got the handler," she said at 6:41 p.m. Maddox adjusted the rearview mirror to see her. "Talk." The handler code for listing 15 matches a shell company registered in Somerset County. The company, Ridgeline Youth Services, was incorporated 18 months ago, listed as a private foster care support agency, 1 employee on record. She paused. "A woman named Janet Voss. Who is she?" "Licensed social worker, formerly employed by Westmoreland County DCS. Left county employment 14 months ago to start Ridgeline. Her business address is a P.O. box in Myersdale, but her residential address is a property outside Confluence." "That's 40 minutes from here," Yates said from the passenger seat. 30 if you don't respect the speed limit. Sparrow pulled up a satellite image. The property is 15 acres, wooded, a main house and 2 outbuildings. One of the outbuildings matches the same electrical draw pattern I saw at Holloway's place, high-capacity wiring for a residential structure. "Same setup," Ridge said from the back seat, where he sat beside Avery. "Different handler. Same network, different node. And here's the thing, Ridgeline Youth Services has 3 current foster placements on file with the state. 3 girls. ages 13, 14, and 16. The truck was silent except for the engine and the tires on cold asphalt and Avery's breathing, which had gone shallow and rapid beside Ridge. 3, Ridge said. 3. Listing 15 is one of them. The other 2 might already be active in the network, or they might be in the pipeline. Names? I have case file numbers, not names. The state database requires authenticated access I don't have. Avery spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the dark cab like a blade. The 13-year-old. Is her case number 2025-WC-4471? Sparrow checked. The pause lasted 3 seconds. Yes. How do you know that? Because that's Marin. That's the girl Torres moved from Holloway's house. They changed her case number when they moved her. I memorized the old one, and I heard Grant on the phone once, reading out the new number to someone. I wrote it down. The truck cab contracted, 5 people in a dark vehicle on a mountain road, and the geometry of the horror they were driving into became clearer with every mile. Avery, Maddox said, you're telling us the girl you saw Torres take from Holloway's house is now placed with Janet Voss at this property? Yes. And you've known this? I've known pieces. I didn't know the address. I didn't know the name Voss, but I knew the number and I knew Marin was still in the network because Grant told me. Her voice hardened. He told me what would happen to her if I didn't behave. He used her as a leash. Maddox's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white in the dashboard glow. The road ahead was empty, climbing through dark pines, and the headlights carved a tunnel through nothing. Change of plan, Ridge said. No change, Maddox said. Same plan. We find the property, we assess, we extract. 3 girls, Judge, not 1. We prepared for 1. 5 of us, 3 of them, the math works. The math works if Voss is alone. If she's got security, then we adapt. And Torres? She gave us 48 hours. That clock's been running for 12. At some point, she's going to call Deacon, realize we're gone, and start looking. Then we better be fast. They reached the outskirts of Confluence at 7:22 p.m., population 900, a town that existed because 2 rivers met there and forgot to keep flowing. Main Street was 3 blocks of dark storefronts and 1 gas station with a single fluorescent tube illuminating a pump island that looked like it belonged in a museum. Beyond the town, the roads turned to gravel, and the trees closed in. Sparrow directed Maddox to a fire road half a mile from the Voss property. They parked behind a berm of plowed snow and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, the deep, total silence of rural Appalachia in winter, where the only sounds are the ones you bring with you. They moved on foot. Yates carried the duffel. Ridge walked point. Maddox and Sparrow flanked Avery in the center. The ground was frozen solid, which was good. No footprints in the hard earth, no crackling leaves, just the muted thud of boots on compacted soil and the occasional snap of a twig that made everyone freeze for 3 seconds before moving again. The Voss property emerged from the tree line like something from a fever dream. The main house was a 2-story colonial with peeling paint and a sagging porch, lit by a single exterior light that cast a pool of yellow on the frozen yard. One of the outbuildings, a converted barn, was dark. The other, a flat-roofed cinder block structure set back from the house near the tree line, had light leaking from beneath its steel door. The same blue-white glow, the same high-capacity wiring, the same purpose. A car sat in the driveway, a dark sedan with government plates. Ridge's stomach dropped. He grabbed Maddox's arm. Government plates. Maddox saw them. His jaw worked. The muscles in his neck corded. She's here, Sparrow whispered. Torres is already here. The plan, such as it was, fractured. Torres wasn't supposed to be here. Torres was supposed to be at the FBI field office in Greensburg, filing motions and monitoring the investigation. But Torres was warden, and warden was cleaning house. And the 48-hour window hadn't been a deadline for the club. It had been a deadline for Torres. 48 hours to liquidate the assets, relocate or eliminate the witnesses, and disappear the evidence before anyone realized what she was. We go now, Ridge said. Right now. Ridge, She's in there with 3 kids, Judge. Right now. We don't know what she's doing in there, but we know what she's capable of, and we know what happens to complications. Ridge's voice was barely controlled. The syllables came through clenched teeth, each word a contained detonation. We go now, or we lose them. Maddox looked at the house, at the cinder block building, at the government sedan. His hand went to his chest, not to the vest he wasn't wearing, but to the space where it would have been, over the heart, over the place where Danny's memorial patch lived. Yates, perimeter. Nobody leaves this property. Copy. Yates melted into the tree line like a shadow with one arm. Sparrow, stay with Avery. Tree line. If you hear shooting, you take her and you run. You don't stop. You don't come back. Judge, that's not a request. Sparrow took Avery's arm. Avery resisted. No, I'm not. Avery. Maddox's voice was the voice from the farmhouse, the voice from the truck stop, the voice that carried 200 men into the dark. You started this. You were brave enough to start it. Now be brave enough to let us finish it. Avery looked at Ridge. He nodded. She let Sparrow pull her back into the trees. Ridge and Maddox crossed the yard. 2 men, no weapons, just leather and scar tissue and the accumulated weight of every child they'd ever pulled from darkness. They split at the porch. Maddox went to the front door. Ridge circled to the back, moving along the side of the house, past dark windows that reflected his own face back at him like accusations. The back door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped into a kitchen that smelled like microwaved soup and disinfectant. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that is not absence of sound, but the presence of something holding its breath. Ridge moved through the kitchen into a hallway. Photographs on the walls. Stock photos of smiling families, the kind that come in frames from department stores. No real pictures, no real life, just the costume of normalcy draped over something hollow. A sound from upstairs. Footsteps. Light, quick. A child moving fast, then stopping. Then a voice. Female. Sharp. Controlled. Sit down, now. Torres. Ridge took the stairs 3 at a time. The staircase creaked, old wood, inevitable, and the sound cut through the house like a signal flare. He didn't care. Stealth was over. Speed was everything. He reached the top and turned left toward the voice and found himself in a narrow hallway with 3 doors. The first was open, an empty bedroom. The second was closed. The third was open, and through it Ridge could see Torres standing in the middle of a small room with her back to the door, and in front of her, sitting on a twin bed pushed against the wall, 3 girls. 13, 14, 16. Small and terrified and perfectly still, the way prey animals go still when the predator is close enough to touch. Torres was holding a phone in one hand and a manila folder in the other. She was talking, or calm, authoritative, the voice of a federal agent conducting business. And the words Ridge caught were fragments, sharp-edged pieces that assembled themselves into a picture. Transport at 9, the vehicle will be unmarked. All 3, yes, clean documentation. She was arranging a transfer. Tonight, within hours. Ridge stepped into the room. Torres spun. Her hand went to her hip, to the service weapon she wore beneath her blazer. And for one frozen second they faced each other across 8 feet of threadbare carpet and the accumulated wreckage of every lie she'd ever told. Callahan. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack. Didn't betray anything other than the cold, professional assessment of a threat entering her operational space. You're making a very serious mistake. Put the phone down. You have no idea what you've walked into. I know exactly what I've walked into. You're moving 3 children to an unknown location through a trafficking network you built and operated under federal cover. Put the phone down. Torres's eyes flicked to the hallway behind him, calculating, measuring. The girls on the bed hadn't moved. The youngest, 13, brown hair, freckles, the face from listing 15, was staring at Ridge with an expression he recognized. Avery's expression, the expression of a child who has stopped expecting rescue. "Where's Mercer?" Torres asked. The answer came from the hallway. Maddox's voice, low and steady from the top of the stairs. "Right here." Torres turned. Maddox stood in the doorway, filling it, his broad frame blocking the hall. He was breathing hard. He'd come through the front door and up the stairs in the time it took Ridge to cross the room. But his hands were still, his eyes locked on Torres with the focus of a man who has identified the target and will not look away. "You're both going to prison," Torres said. "Breaking and entering, obstruction of a federal investigation, interference with—" "With what?" Maddox stepped into the room. The space shrank. 3 adults, 3 children, and the walls closing in. "With a transfer? With a sale? With whatever you were arranging on that phone call?" "I am conducting a federal operation. You are trafficking children." Maddox's voice didn't rise. It dropped. It went to a register that Ridge had heard only once before, in Fallujah, in a building where they'd found things no human being should find, and it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier, denser, harder to breathe. "I know who you are. I know what you are. And I know what you did to a girl named Marin and a girl named Lily, and a girl whose name you took away and replaced with a number." Torres's mask cracked. Not dramatically, totes. A hairline fracture visible only in the microscopic tightening of the muscles around her eyes, and the almost imperceptible shift in her stance from authoritative to defensive. She was recalculating. Ridge could see it, the machine behind her eyes processing new data, discarding strategies, building new ones. "You have no evidence," she said. "You have the testimony of a traumatized foster child with a documented history of behavioral issues. No court in this country." "This isn't a court." The words landed. Torres went still. For the first time, the professional calm showed something underneath. Not fear, not yet, but the recognition that the rules she'd operated under, the institutional protections she'd weaponized, the badge and the authority and the bureaucratic maze she'd used as camouflage, none of it functioned in this room. This room operated on different principles. Older ones. The principles of men who had decided that a child's safety was worth more than their own freedom, their own safety, their own lives. "Sparrow," Maddox said, and his voice carried through the hallway, down the stairs, out the back door, across the frozen yard to the tree line where Sparrow stood with her phone already recording. She'd been recording since they left the truck. Audio. Time-stamped. Uploaded in real time to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. Torres heard the name and understood. Her hand moved, fast, trained, the muscle memory of a federal agent reaching for a weapon, and Ridge was faster, not graceful, not choreographed. 48 years of broken-knuckle reflex, his hand closing around her wrist before the weapon cleared the holster, twisting, applying pressure to the joint until her fingers opened and the gun dropped to the carpet with a muffled thud. Torres drove her elbow into his ribs. Pain exploded through his side. Sharp, electric, the kind that locks your breath in your throat. And he staggered but didn't let go. She was strong, trained, fighting with the desperate efficiency of someone whose entire world was collapsing, and who understood that the next 60 seconds would determine whether she spent the rest of her life in a cell or disappeared into the network she'd built. Maddox moved. He caught Torres's free arm, pinned it behind her back, and together they brought her down. Not gently, not violently, but with the controlled force of 2 men who had restrained people in situations far more chaotic than a bedroom in a farmhouse in Somerset County. Torres hit the floor. Ridge's knee was on her back. Maddox held her arms. She was breathing hard, her cheek pressed against the carpet, and the sound that came from her was not a scream, but something lower, a growl, primal and furious, the sound of a predator caught in a trap. "You don't know what you've done," she hissed. "The network doesn't end with me. You think I'm the top? I'm middle management, the people above me, the clients, the money, the infrastructure. They'll what?" Ridge leaned down, his face close to hers, his voice raw from the blow to his ribs. "They'll send someone. They'll come for us. Let them. We've been waiting our whole lives for someone to come for us. It's the only thing we're good at." Torres's eyes shifted. Not to Ridge, to the girls on the bed. The youngest, Marin, listing 15, the girl with freckles who was supposed to be sold in 60 hours, was watching the scene with an expression that Ridge had never seen on a child's face and hoped he never would again. It was not relief. It was not fear. It was the look of someone witnessing the unraveling of the only reality they knew, the demolition of the walls of their prison, and not yet believing that the sky above the rubble was real. "Marin," Ridge said, still holding Torres down, still breathing through the pain in his ribs. "My name is Ridge. The man behind me is Maddox. We're here to take you home." Marin didn't move, didn't speak. But the girl next to her, 14, dark eyes, thin as a wire, reached over and took Marin's hand. Footsteps on the stairs. Yates appeared in the doorway, one-armed, alert, his remaining hand resting on the duffel strap across his chest. "Vehicle approaching, half-mile out, moving fast, no headlights." Ridge and Maddox looked at each other. "The transport," Torres said from the floor, and there was something new in her voice now. Not triumph, not gloating, but the cold satisfaction of a woman playing a card she'd been holding. "I told you, the network doesn't end with me. The pickup was scheduled for 9. They're early." Ridge checked his watch. 8:11 p.m. "How many?" Maddox asked Yates. "Can't tell. One vehicle. Could be 2 inside. Could be 6. "Armed?" "If they're network transport, they're armed. These aren't foster parents." The room snapped into a different register. The confrontation was over. The extraction had begun. Ridge pulled Torres to her feet and Maddox secured her wrists behind her back with a zip tie from Yates's duffel. Not handcuffs, not official, just a plastic strip that would hold long enough. "Girls," Maddox said. His voice changed. Not softer, warmer. The voice he used for children, the voice that carried the ghost of every bedtime story he'd never get to tell Danny. The voice that understood fragility without condescending to it. "We're leaving, right now. I need you to stay close, stay quiet, and stay behind me. Can you do that?" The oldest girl, 16, hollow-cheeked, a bruise on her jawline that was 3 days old and turning yellow, stood first. She pulled the other 2 up with her. She'd been the protector in this house, Ridge realized. The one who took the hits so the younger ones didn't have to. The one who absorbed the damage. "Follow me," she said to Marin and the third girl. And they did, without question. Because in the absence of functional adults, children build their own hierarchies of safety, and this girl had been their wall. They moved downstairs, through the kitchen, out the back door into the frozen night. The cold was vicious, 20 degrees below what it had been that afternoon, the temperature plummeting as the clear sky radiated heat into space. The girls had no coats, no gloves. Ridge stripped off his leather jacket and draped it over the youngest. Maddox gave his to the 16-year-old. Yates pulled a fleece from the duffel for the third. Torres walked between Ridge and Maddox, zip-tied and silent, her eyes scanning the tree line with the calculating intensity of someone looking for an opening. They reached the tree line as the vehicle's engine became audible. A low, heavy sound, diesel, the kind of engine you put in a vehicle designed to carry cargo rather than passengers. It was coming up the gravel road from the south, moving fast, and its headlights were off. "Sparrow," Maddox called into the darkness. Sparrow materialized from behind a pine tree, Avery beside her. Avery saw the 3 girls, and her hand went to her mouth. Marin saw Avery, and her face changed. Recognition, the collision of 2 girls who had shared a nightmare and been separated by the machinery of it. "Marin," Avery whispered. "Avery." The 13-year-old's voice cracked on the name, 2 syllables carrying 11 months of separation, of wondering, of the particular agony of knowing someone else was suffering the same thing you suffered and being powerless to stop it. There was no time for reunion. The diesel engine was closer now, 400 meters, maybe less, and the headlights flicked on, sweeping the front of the house with twin beams that cut through the dark like searchlights. "The fire road," Ridge said. "Move." They ran. 7 people plus Torres crashing through the frozen underbrush in the dark, branches whipping across faces and arms, the ground uneven and treacherous with hidden roots and frost-slicked rocks. Ridge held Marin's hand. Maddox had Torres by the arm, propelling her forward with the kind of grip that made resistance a theoretical concept. Yates brought up the rear, moving backward every few steps to check the gap, his one hand pulling the duffel strap tight across his chest. Behind them, doors slammed at the farmhouse. Voices. Male. 2 of them, then a third, shouting. The sound of boots on the porch, on the gravel, on the frozen ground. Then a flashlight beam raking the tree line, sweeping left, sweeping right, and for one terrible second catching the reflective stripe on Yates's boot before he ducked behind a fallen trunk. "They see us," Yates said. No panic. Pure information. They reached the fire road. Maddox's truck was 50 meters ahead, hidden behind the snow berm. Ridge could see it, a darker shape against the dark. And in that moment, the 50 meters felt like 50 miles, like an ocean, like the distance between what they were and what they needed to be. Go, Maddox said. Get them in the truck. I'll hold the line. Judge, get them in the truck! Ridge ran. He pulled Marin with him, and Sparrow grabbed the other two girls, and Avery was already sprinting. And they reached the truck, and Ridge threw the passenger door open and started lifting children into the cab and the back seat, bodies piling in. Too many people for too small a space. The 16-year-old pulling Marin onto her lap, and Avery squeezing in beside them, and Sparrow climbing into the truck bed. Behind him, in the tree line, Maddox stood in the dark with Torres beside him, and Yates at his flank. 3 figures against the night. The flashlight beams were closer now, bouncing through the trees, and the voices were louder, and somewhere in the chaos, Ridge heard a sound that rearranged everything. A sound he recognized from a different life, a different darkness. A gunshot. Then 2 more. The shots punched through the night air like fists through glass, echoing off the frozen hillsides, sending birds screaming from the canopy. Ridge dropped flat behind the truck. The girls in the cab went silent. The terrible practiced silence of children who had learned that sound meant danger and stillness meant survival. Judge! Ridge screamed into the dark. 3 seconds of nothing. The longest 3 seconds of Ridge Callahan's life. Longer than the knife wound in Wheeling. Longer than every night in his father's house. Longer than the 30 years between the boy he'd been and the man he was trying to become. Then Maddox's voice, ragged, winded, but alive. We're coming! Start the truck! Ridge vaulted into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Headlights blazed. In their beam, he saw Maddox and Yates emerging from the tree line, dragging Torres between them. Yates's left sleeve was dark and wet. Blood. His remaining arm, the one he used for everything, was bleeding from a wound Ridge couldn't assess in the strobing chaos of headlight and shadow. They threw Torres into the truck bed beside Sparrow. Maddox slammed into the passenger seat. Yates climbed in after Torres, his blood leaving dark streaks on the tailgate. Drive, Maddox said. Ridge drove. The truck fishtailed on the frozen fire road, tires spinning, gravel spraying, and then they caught, and the vehicle lurched forward, and they were moving, accelerating into the dark with 7 people and a prisoner and the weight of everything they'd just done pressing down on the roof like a collapsing sky. In the rearview mirror, flashlight beams danced at the edge of the fire road. No pursuit, not yet. But the gunshots would bring attention. The local police, eventually, and then the FBI. And then the questions, the investigations, the machinery of a system that Torres had corrupted, and that would now, in its confused and lumbering way, try to determine who the criminals were, and who the saviors were, and whether, in the end, there was any difference. Ridge drove through the mountain dark, with bleeding hands gripping the wheel, and 4 rescued children in his truck, and a dirty federal agent zip-tied in the bed, and the absolute, unshakable knowledge that they had crossed every line that existed, and there was nothing left ahead of them but the consequences. And somewhere in the back seat, in the tangle of arms and bodies and borrowed jackets, a 13-year-old girl named Marin reached across the darkness and found Avery's hand and held it and didn't let go. They drove for 47 minutes without speaking. The mountain roads twisted through darkness so complete that the headlights seemed to create the world as they moved through it. Asphalt appearing from nothing, trees materializing at the edge of visibility, reflective road signs flashing and vanishing like signals from a civilization that no longer existed. Yates was bleeding in the truck bed. Sparrow had stripped off her jacket and pressed it against the wound, a through and through on his left forearm, the bullet having entered below the elbow and exited through the muscle without hitting bone. He sat with his back against the cab, his face gray in the cold, his jaw locked against the pain, and he didn't make a sound. Torres sat across from him, zip-tied and silent, watching Sparrow work with the expression of a woman performing calculations that no longer added up. Ridge drove. His hands were locked on the wheel at 10 and 2, white-knuckled, and his breathing was the only thing keeping him tethered to the physical world. In the back seat, 4 girls were pressed together in a tangle of borrowed jackets and body heat. Avery against the window, Marin against Avery, the 14-year-old in the middle, and the 16-year-old on the far side with her arm wrapped around all of them like a human seatbelt. No one spoke. No one cried. They breathed together in the dark, and the rhythm of it was the most human sound Ridge had ever heard. Maddox was on the burner phone. He'd been making calls since they left the fire road. Short, encrypted, each one a piece of a puzzle he was assembling in real time. Ridge caught fragments, names he didn't recognize, agency acronyms. The particular language of a man who had spent decades navigating the space between outlaw culture and institutional power, and who understood, with bitter clarity, that the only way to bring down a corrupt federal agent was to find a less corrupt federal agent. At 9:03 p.m., Maddox ended his last call and set the phone on the dashboard. "We're going to Clarksburg," he said. "West Virginia?" "FBI field office. The SAC is a man named Harlan Briggs. Served with me in Fallujah, left the Marines, went to law school, joined the Bureau. He runs the Regional Organized Crime Task Force." Maddox paused. "I haven't spoken to him in 8 years, but he owes me something that can't be repaid, and I'm calling it in." "You trust him?" "I trust that he's not Torres. At this point, that's enough." They crossed the state line into West Virginia at 9:31 p.m. The roads were better here, plowed, salted, illuminated by the occasional streetlight that appeared and disappeared like a heartbeat. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read 9 degrees. The heater was running full blast, but it couldn't keep up with the cold leaking through the truck's aging seals, and Ridge could see his breath in the dashboard light. Marin had fallen asleep. Her head was on Avery's shoulder, and Avery was staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard gaze of a combat veteran, which is what she was, Ridge realized. 17 years old and a combat veteran of a war that didn't have a name or a flag or a memorial, just an endless succession of rooms and strangers, and the systematic dismantlement of everything that makes a person a person. He caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Almost there," he said. She didn't nod, didn't respond, but something in her face shifted, a microscopic relaxation of the muscles around her eyes, the faintest easing of the jaw. And Ridge understood that this was as close to trust as she could manage right now, and it was more than enough. The FBI field office in Clarksburg was a modern building set back from the road behind a parking lot and a security gate. At 10:17 p.m. on a Wednesday night, it was mostly dark. Just the lobby lights and the glow of a few late-burning offices on the upper floors. Maddox directed Ridge to the visitors' parking area, and they sat there for 3 minutes, engine running, while Maddox stared at the building like a man staring at a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. Then he got out. Harlan Briggs met them in the lobby. He was a tall, lean man in his mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the permanently skeptical expression of someone who had heard every lie the world had to offer and was still, somehow, surprised by each new one. He wore a rumpled suit with no tie, and his badge hung from a lanyard around his neck like an afterthought. He looked at Maddox, at the truck in the parking lot, at the children visible through the windows, at Torres, zip-tied in the truck bed with Sparrow standing over her like a sentry. "Maddox," he said. That was all, just the name. But the way he said it carried 20 years of history, shared foxholes, shared losses, the particular bond of men who had kept each other alive in places where survival was an act of stubborn resistance against the mathematics of violence. "I need your help," Maddox said. "I can see that." "The woman in my truck bed is FBI Special Agent Maria Torres out of Greensburg. She's been running a trafficking network through the foster care system in western Pennsylvania for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I have digital evidence, eyewitness testimony from 4 victims, and audio recordings of her coordinating a transfer of 3 minors to an unknown buyer. One of my men was shot during the extraction. The girls are cold and scared and haven't eaten since this morning. And I have approximately 6 hours before Torres's people realize she's missing and start looking for her, and for us." Briggs listened to all of this without his expression changing. When Maddox finished, Briggs was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out his phone, made one call, and within 15 minutes the building came alive. What followed was the machinery of legitimate justice operating at a speed Ridge had never witnessed. Briggs activated his task force, He brought in a federal prosecutor from the Northern District of West Virginia. He called a judge for emergency warrants. He arranged for a trauma-trained child advocate to be present before the girls were interviewed. He dispatched agents to the Voss property in Confluence, to Holloway's farmhouse, and to Torres's home address in Greensburg. He also called a medic for Yates, who sat in a plastic chair in a hallway, and submitted to treatment with the stoic endurance of a man who had lost an arm and considered a bullet wound an administrative inconvenience. Torres was processed in a room Ridge couldn't see but could imagine. The fluorescent lights, the metal table, the recording equipment, the slow and irreversible transformation from agent to suspect. She would have a lawyer by morning. She would fight. The legal process would be long, ugly, and uncertain. But Sparrow's recordings were clean, and the digital evidence was intact, and the testimony of 4 girls who had nothing left to lose was the kind of testimony that even the most expensive defense attorney couldn't make disappear. Ridge sat in the lobby and watched it happen. He had no role in it, no function. He was a civilian in a federal building, a biker with scarred knuckles and a cracked rib from Torres's elbow, and the machinery of justice didn't need him anymore. It needed lawyers and warrants and chain of custody documentation and all the procedural architecture that he'd spent his life distrusting. And now, in the fluorescent-lit lobby of an FBI field office in West Virginia, he had to let it work. Maddox sat down beside him at midnight. They didn't speak for a long time. The lobby was quiet. A cleaning crew had come and gone. The vending machine in the corner hummed. Outside, through the glass doors, the parking lot was white with frost, and the sky was black and star-filled. The kind of sky you only see in places where the cities haven't reached yet, where the light pollution hasn't erased the evidence that the universe is vast and indifferent and occasionally, improbably, kind. Briggs says the network is bigger than Torres, Maddox said finally. She wasn't lying about that. She's middle management. There are people above her, clients, facilitators, money people. It'll take months, maybe years. But they'll get them. Briggs will get them, or he'll die trying. He's that kind. Maddox leaned back in his chair. The plastic creaked under his weight. The girls are with the advocate. They're safe, warm, being fed. Avery? She's with them. She asked to stay with Marin. Ridge nodded. He stared at the vending machine. The hum was steady, mechanical, oddly comforting, the sound of a machine performing its single function without deviation or doubt. I owe you an apology, Ridge said. For what? For wheeling, for walking away, for 4 months of nothing, for calling you and telling you to send the code instead of asking, for every time I treated this club like my personal weapon instead of my family. He paused. The words were hard, not because they were untrue, but because they were so true they felt like surgery, necessary, painful, and exposing something that had been hidden under scar tissue for too long. You were right about all of it. I've been running alone because alone is the only shape I know, and every time someone tries to stand next to me, I find a way to make them leave, because if they leave on my terms, it doesn't count as abandonment. Maddox was quiet. The vending machine hummed. I know, he said. You know? Ridge, I've known you for 11 years. You think I don't know why you do the things you do? Maddox turned to look at him. His eyes were tired, the deep geological tiredness of a man who has been holding up a roof for decades. But they were also clear, present. The eyes of someone who had chosen to be here, in this lobby, at this hour, with this man, and who understood the cost and paid it willingly. The question was never whether I understood you. The question was whether you'd stop running long enough to let the understanding matter. Ridge's jaw clenched. He looked at the floor, at his boots, scuffed and salt-stained and cracked at the soles, at the hands in his lap, the knuckles swollen from 48 hours of gripping things too tightly. Steering wheels, porch railings, a federal agent's wrist, a child's hand in the dark. I'm done running, he said. Yeah? Yeah. Good. Because there's a 17-year-old upstairs who's going to need a permanent address, and you live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment above a garage, and I happen to know the 2nd bedroom has been empty since you moved in 12 years ago. Ridge looked at him. The suggestion landed like a stone in still water, concentric ripples spreading outward, rearranging everything they touched. That's not how foster placement works, he said. No, it's how family works. We'll figure out the paperwork later. The night dissolved into early morning in the way that bad nights do, not ending so much as gradually losing their grip, the darkness thinning, the weight lifting, not all at once, but in increments so small you don't notice them until suddenly the sky is gray instead of black, and the birds are making sounds that you'd forgotten. Birds make, and the world, impossibly, is still turning. At 5:14 a.m., Briggs came down to the lobby and told them the girls had been formally placed under federal witness protection pending the investigation. Torres had been charged, trafficking, conspiracy, obstruction, and 14 counts of child exploitation. Her attorney had arrived at 3 a.m. and spent 2 hours with her, and when he emerged, his face had the particular pallor of a man who had heard things that would follow him into his sleep for a very long time. The network was being dismantled. Simultaneously, across 3 states, Briggs's task force was executing warrants on 11 properties. Janet Voss had been arrested at a motel outside Cumberland where she'd been waiting for the transport that never arrived. 7 other individuals connected to the network, handlers, facilitators, a web developer who'd built the platform, were in various stages of custody. The cryptocurrency wallets Sparrow had traced were frozen by federal order. The mixing service had been shut down. And in a database somewhere, 14 listings were permanently deleted. Not scrubbed, not hidden, not migrated to a different server. Deleted. Erased from existence the way they should have been erased the moment they were created. The way the lives they represented should never have been commodified in the first place. It wasn't enough. Ridge knew that. Maddox knew it. Briggs knew it. The clients who had used the network, the buyers, the consumers, the men and women who had paid money for access to children, most of them were still out there, still breathing, still walking through their comfortable lives with their terrible secrets intact. It would take years to reach them all. Some would never be reached. That was the math of the thing, the bitter arithmetic that every person who fights this particular war learns to live with. You save some, you lose some, and the gap between the two is where your soul either survives or doesn't. But 14 listings were gone. 4 girls were safe. 1 network was burning, and a corrupt federal agent was sitting in an interrogation room watching her empire collapse in real time. It wasn't enough. But it was something, and sometimes something is all you get. They left the field office at 6:30 a.m. The sun was just coming up, a thin line of gold along the eastern ridge, turning the frost on the parking lot into a field of tiny fires. The air was brutal, single digits, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your eyes water, and every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. But the sky was clear, and the mountains were visible on every horizon, and the world looked clean in the way that only winter mornings can make a world look clean. Yates was waiting by the truck, his arm in a proper sling now, a cigarette between his lips. He'd refused to go to a hospital. "I've been shot worse," he'd told the medic, which was technically true and profoundly not the point, but no one had the energy to argue. Avery came out last. She walked through the glass doors of the FBI building and stood on the steps and looked at the sky with an expression Ridge had never seen on her face before. It took him a moment to identify it. Then he realized it was the absence of an expression, the absence of fear, of vigilance, of the constant low-grade terror that had been her baseline state for so long that its removal left her features temporarily blank, like a page that had been erased and was waiting to be written on again. Marin was beside her. The 2 girls stood on the steps in the cold dawn light, their shoulders touching, and they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were the only 2 people in the world who fully understood what the other had survived, and that understanding was a language that didn't require words. Ridge watched them from the bottom of the steps. His cracked rib ached. His hands were stiff. His eyes burned from 48 hours without sleep. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean, the emotional equivalent of a house after a flood, still standing, but everything inside rearranged, waterlogged, changed. Maddox put a hand on his shoulder. The weight of it was enormous. Not physically. Maddox wasn't pressing hard, but in what it carried. 11 years of brotherhood, 4 months of estrangement, one night that had cracked them both open and something new growing in the fractures. "Let's go home," Maddox said. The drive back to Pennsylvania took 2.5 hours. Avery rode with Ridge in the truck cab. Marin went with Sparrow in a vehicle Briggs had loaned them, a Bureau sedan that Sparrow would return later and that she drove with the casual disregard for speed limits that was her only visible character flaw. Yates rode in the truck bed again, by choice, because he said the cold air kept him alert and because Ridge suspected he needed the solitude of open sky to process what had happened. Maddox rode behind them on Ridge's Road King, which Deacon had driven to the field office at 4 a.m. without being asked, because that was what the club did. They showed up. They rode. They carried each other's weight without keeping score. They reached Brenton at 9:15 a.m. The clubhouse was intact. Deacon had held it. Torres's people had never come, either because Torres had been arrested before she could give the order, or because the network's transport team had decided that 3 armed men in a tree line were enough discouragement for one night. The men were still there. Not all 200. Most had gone home after the farmhouse rescue, back to their jobs and families and the ordinary architecture of lives that paused when the code came and resumed when the work was done. But 40 or 50 remained, the core, the ones who stayed not because they were asked, but because leaving felt impossible. When Ridge pulled the truck into the lot, they were standing outside. In the cold, in the morning light. Leather jackets, scarred hands, coffee cups, cigarettes. They watched the truck park. They watched the doors open. They watched Avery step out, and then Marin from the sedan, and then the knowledge of what had happened rippled through the group in the way that knowledge moves among men who communicate through presence rather than words. Nobody cheered, nobody applauded, nobody made a speech. Deacon stepped forward, handed Ridge a cup of coffee, and said, "Welcome back." That was enough. The weeks that followed were slow and difficult and shot through with moments of unexpected grace. The legal machinery ground on, depositions, hearings, evidence review, the glacial process of building a federal case against Torres, and the network she'd operated. Avery and Marin and the other 2 girls were placed in emergency federal protection, which in practice meant safe houses staffed by advocates that Briggs had personally vetted. But Ridge visited Avery every day, every single day, sometimes for hours, sometimes for 10 minutes. He brought coffee. He brought books. She liked mystery novels, which struck Ridge as either ironic or inevitable. He brought silence, which she needed more than anything. The permission to sit in a room with another human being and not perform, not explain, not justify her existence. The foster system moved slowly, as foster systems do. Ridge applied for emergency guardianship. The paperwork was a nightmare. Background checks, home inspections, financial reviews, the entire apparatus of institutional suspicion directed at a man whose rap sheet included a bar fight in 2009 and a disorderly conduct charge from a protest in 2014. Maddox hired a lawyer. The club paid for it. No one discussed the cost. On a Thursday afternoon in late February, 6 weeks after the night at the diner, Ridge sat in a family court in Greensburg while a judge reviewed his application. Avery sat beside him. She was wearing a new jacket, a real one, warm, the right size, and her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, and her gray eyes moved around the courtroom with the alert but no longer desperate scanning of someone who was learning, slowly, that not every room contained a threat. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and the weary compassion of someone who had seen too many broken families and not enough repaired ones. She reviewed the file. She looked at Ridge. She looked at Avery. The court notes that Mr. Callahan has no prior experience as a foster parent or guardian, she said. Ridge's lawyer began to respond, but Avery spoke first. Neither did the last one, she said. And the state gave me to him anyway. At least this one showed up. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at Avery over her glasses. Something moved across her face. Not amusement, not sympathy, but recognition. The recognition of a girl who had survived a system designed to protect her and had emerged with nothing but her own stubborn refusal to disappear. The judge signed the order. Ridge and Avery walked out of the courthouse into a February afternoon that was cold but bright, the snow melting in patches on the sidewalk, the first suggestion of spring in the angle of the light. They stood on the steps, and neither of them knew what to do, because the thing that had just happened was so large and so quiet that it defied the usual rituals of celebration. "So," Avery said. "So," Ridge said. "I guess you're stuck with me." "Guess so. I'm not easy to live with." "Neither am I. I leave lights on. I eat cereal at midnight. I have nightmares that wake up the whole building. I snore loud enough to shake the walls. I forget to buy groceries, and I spend too much time talking to a motorcycle." Avery almost smiled, the muscles engaged. The corners of her mouth lifted by a fraction of a centimeter. It wasn't a full smile. It was a sketch, a rough draft. The architectural foundation of something that might, given time and safety, and the steady accumulation of mornings where nothing terrible happened, become real. "Can I keep the vest?" she asked. "That's Judge's call." "He already said yes. I asked him yesterday." Ridge looked at her. 17 years old, survivor, witness. The girl who stole a phone and chose a stranger and set a world on fire. "Then it's yours," he said. Spring came the way spring comes to western Pennsylvania. Reluctantly, grudgingly, as if the land itself had to be convinced that warmth was worth the risk. The snow retreated to the shadows and the hilltops. The rivers swelled with meltwater. The trees put out the first tentative buds, pale green against the dark branches, testing the air before committing. The Iron Revenant clubhouse got a new roof. Deacon organized the work crew. 16 members spent a Saturday in April tearing off the old corrugated steel and replacing it with material that didn't leak. Avery helped. She carried tools. She handed up sheets of metal. She climbed a ladder despite Ridge telling her not to, and stood on the roof in the wind with her hair flying and Judge's vest over her flannel shirt, and she looked out at the town and the hills and the highway and the world that had tried to destroy her and failed. Marin was placed with a family in the next county. Good people. Briggs had vouched for them personally, a retired teacher and her husband who had fostered 11 children and adopted 3. She and Avery talked on the phone every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes for 3 minutes. The connection was the point, not the content. The assurance that the other person was still there, still real, still free. The other 2 girls, the 14-year-old whose name was Beth and the 16-year-old whose name was Colleen and who had been the wall, the protector, the one who took the hits, were placed in separate homes in adjacent towns by their own request, close enough to visit, far enough to start over. Colleen enrolled in a GED program. Beth joined a swim team, small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that should not feel miraculous but did, because ordinary was what had been stolen from them, and getting it back was the real rescue, the one that happened not in a farmhouse at night, but in the slow, unglamorous aftermath of daylight. The first Saturday of June, Ridge pulled his Harley out of the garage beneath his apartment. The apartment that was no longer just his. Avery's room had a bookshelf now, and a desk, and a lamp she'd picked out herself, and the mystery novels were stacked in a precarious tower that grew taller every week. The apartment smelled different. It smelled like 2 people instead of 1. Like cereal at midnight and coffee in the morning, and the particular alchemy of a space that had been empty for 12 years learning how to be full. He rode to the clubhouse. The lot was already packed, 50, 60 bikes, chrome flashing in the summer sun. Someone had set up a grill near the side entrance. Ribs and burgers. The smoke drifted across the lot in lazy blue tendrils, mixing with the exhaust fumes and the smell of warm asphalt, and the indefinable scent of a community gathering for no reason other than the fact that they could. Avery was already there. She was sitting on a picnic table near the fence, her boots on the bench, Judge's leather vest over a tank top, talking to Yates about something that made the one-armed sergeant laugh. A real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind of sound that Ridge had heard from him maybe twice in 11 years. Maddox was at the grill, apron on, spatula in hand. The president of the Iron Revenant Motorcycle Club, 2 combat tours, 1 dead son, standing over a smoking grill and arguing with Burns about the correct internal temperature of a burger with the intensity of a man who took everything seriously because he had learned, at great cost, that the small things were the only things that lasted. Ridge parked his bike and sat on it for a moment, engine off, the heat of the sun on his face and the distant roar of conversation and laughter and the low throb of a stereo playing something old and southern from inside the clubhouse. He watched the scene. The men. The smoke. The girl at the picnic table who was no longer flinching, no longer folding, no longer making herself small. Avery caught his eye across the lot. She raised her hand. Not a wave, just a lift, an acknowledgement, the gesture of someone who sees you and wants you to know they see you. Ridge raised his hand back. Later, when the sun was low and the shadows were long and the grill had burned down to embers and the men were scattered in loose groups with bottles and cigarettes and the quiet contentment of people who had been through something together and come out the other side, Avery stood up on the picnic table. The conversations died. 50, 60 faces turned toward her. Scarred men, wounded men, men who had ridden through a blizzard for a girl they'd never met, who had stood in the snow outside a farmhouse like an army of ghosts, who had answered a code that meant a child was in danger, and had never, not once, asked what was in it for them. Avery looked at them. Her gray eyes moved across the faces, and in each one she found something. A nod, a raised glass, a hand pressed briefly to the heart. The language of men who didn't know how to say what they felt, but felt it with a depth and ferocity that rendered language unnecessary. Some people have guardian angels, she said. Her voice carried across the lot, clear and steady, and Ridge heard in it something that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Not confidence exactly, but presence. The sound of a person who had learned, against all evidence, that she was allowed to take up space in the world. I got 200 bikers. The lot erupted. Not with cheers, with engine noise. One by one, the men reached for their ignitions and turned them over, and the sound built from a growl to a roar to a wall of thunder that shook the windows of the clubhouse and rattled the fence and rolled out across the neighborhood and the town and the hills beyond, carrying with it a promise that didn't need words because it was older than words, older than language, older than the very concept of family. The promise was simple. When the world looks away, they won't. Ridge stood at the edge of the lot with a warm bottle in his hand, and the last light of a June evening painting the sky in colors that had no name, and he watched a 17-year-old girl standing on a picnic table surrounded by the roar of 200 engines, wearing a dead boy's memorial on her shoulder like a badge of honor, and he felt something in his chest that he had no word for and didn't need one. The coal that had been burning since the diner, the one that had ignited when a girl slid a phone across a greasy table and trusted a stranger with her life, was still there. But it wasn't burning anymore. It was warm. Just warm. The kind of warmth that doesn't consume, that doesn't demand, that doesn't drive you into the dark with clenched fists and a desperate need to save something. The kind of warmth that stays. He set his bottle on a fence post, crossed the lot, sat down on the bench beside the picnic table where Avery was still standing, her arms raised, her face tilted toward the sound of the engines and the fading light. She looked down at him. "You good?" she asked. Ridge Callahan, 48 years old, scarred knuckles, cracked rib, a lifetime of empty rooms and cold rides, and the particular loneliness of a man who never learned how to be saved because no one ever tried, looked up at the girl who had changed everything by asking for help in the only way she knew how, and he told her the truth. "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." And beneath the summer sky, surrounded by leather and loyalty and the hard-won wreckage of second chances, the engines roared on,